Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. His self-proclaimed Gigi had allowed him to join the Ninja Academy today for his birthday present. He was ecstatic at first about going, especially when his Gigi dropped him off at the building himself. But upon entering the building everything started to fall apart real quick. The receptionist for some reason seemed to kept staring at him angrily while she handed him the directions to his class before quickly shooing him away. Afterwards, when he made it to the room, he was told to sit at the very back of the classroom in a row of empty seats. He should have known something was wrong when he wasn't told to introduce himself to the class, as he heard older students say they had to do as he had eavesdropped on them. But as he was walking to his seat, he was tripped 3 times on his way there. Once finally making it to his chair, he was totally ignored by the teacher. When the class finally ended, he left to school to see all the parents of the children in his class there picking up their children. While they ignored him, they still sent angry glares his way. So now he found himself walking down the seemingly empty street. Naruto wasn't stupid, neither naive. Surprising for his young age, but he knew that many of the adults of the village and some teens seemed to hate him for being born on the day of the Kyuubi attack, while many seemed to think he was the Kyuubi incarnate because of his infamous birthmark-like whiskers. While he vowed to never cry again when he was kicked out of the orphanage last year, he sometimes wanted to break down and cry because of all the stares. He knew they needed an outlet for the hate towards the Kyuubi. Did they really have to use him? He thought as his tiny hands curled into fists. He let out a long sigh as he uncurled his fists. Hate breeds only more hurt and hate. He would show them he wasn't the Kyuubi. Standing a little bit taller, he started to strode forward before blinking while he took in his surroundings. He was in the bad part of Konoha that his Gigi told him to never enter. Before he could turn and leave, a small stone flew through the air, hitting him on the side of the head, opening a gash on his head. Tears barely being kept in check as he cried out in pain, he looked towards the direction it was thrown from and saw something that made him paralyzed in fear. Not standing more than 15 feet away was a group of drunks who seemed to grin maliciously at his pain, a few of them holding some more stones while one had a club and another with a broken bottle. Realizing he needed to get away, he turned and took off, sprinting as fast as his little legs could carry him while weaving in between streets and alleys as he tried to loose the group. Finally making it into the small forest in the city that he was sure he could lose them, he looked over his shoulder and silently cursed as they still were following him. As he kept on running, he started to lose them in the thick trees before tripping over a root. Cursing his luck as he started to roll towards some thick bushes before crying out as he fell down a hole. As he kept on rolling left and right down the blackened tunnel, he started to pray to Kami to let him live, but as soon as he was done, he rolled to a stop in what seemed to be a large cave. Wiping away the dried blood from his forehead, ignoring the fact he didn't feel a wound, he looked around in awe as his eyes adjusted to the low light. When he noticed rays of light seemed to come through from the top of the cave, illuminated what seemed to be a small concrete city. He let out a soft "wow" as he looked around. Slowly he started to walk towards the abandoned city. He slipped through a small opening in the fence with a sign on it in what looked like a different language. He found himself on what looked like a really big road. He saw weird contraptions made of metal that seemed to be broken as they laid in multiple pieces with cobwebs littered on them. There were different sort of contraptions. Some looked like they had wings like birds, while some had 4 smaller wings on the top arranged like an X. There were other without wings but looked like the carriages he saw before, but these were made of metal and varied from some with 4 wheels to some with 12. Then there were some that were big with tubes sticking out the front top of them. He looked on in awe before arriving at what seemed to be the main building, judging by the many words on the side. Walking through the doors, noting they creaked from many years off disuse. The inside was dark with the only light coming from a small hole in the ceiling. Before he could get too far inside the building, he tripped over something slightly hard that broke as he fell on top of it. Raising himself slightly, he cursed himself for no looking at the ground before he froze as he saw white bones under him. Ah! He screamed as he jumped up and backwards away from the now slightly crushed skeleton before he tripped on something else. Falling back, he felt his hand hit some kind of switch before the thing he heard started to make a loud rumbling noise before the lights flickered on, while some were broken enough lit up the room to show it was some kind of office. Trying to control his ragged breathing, he looked around and saw there were a few more skeletons laying around or sitting in chairs. Slowly getting to his feet, he started to explore around the office, being careful to give a small prayer as he stepped around each skeleton he came across. He found many books. Deciding that they might tell him what this place was, he was disappointed when he found that they were in the same language as everything else around here. Giving a disappointed sigh, he was about to leave and explore some more before something caught his eye. It was a thick book with words he could understand. Quickly walking towards the book, he read the cover, which had writing in both languages on it. English-Japanese dictionary. He read aloud before opening the first page and saw it had each word of his language and what had to be the same word in the other language. Giving a excited yell, he gave a small thanks to Kami before pocketing the book. Before leaving the building, he found the machine he hit earlier and found the switch he thought he hit. Flipping it, he was rewarded with the lights going off again. Giving a small smile, he left the building before heading back towards the hole he came through. I got my own secret place now, he thought as he smiled happily as he started to climb back up the hole. Many thoughts were racing through his mind at what he found. He knew he couldn't tell his Gigi because he would tell him to never come back here. He also couldn't tell anyone else because they would probably come try and take it for themselves. Exiting the hole through the ground, he closed his eyes as they were hit with the blinding light of the setting sun. Slowly blinking, he looked around for somewhere to hide his book. Seeing what looked like a hollow tree not too far away, he slid the book inside the hollow area before stepping back and letting out another smile. He turned and started to walk back towards his apartment before he heard something that made his blood run cold. I found the brat. He heard a slightly slurred voice yell before other yells broke out. Turning to his right, he saw a slowly gathering of the same group he lost earlier. Turning around, he started to run, but before he could, a stone hit him in the back of the head, making him fall forward. Before he could even get up, he felt the first blow hit him in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him and cracking a rib. For what felt like hours, blow after blow started to rain down on him until he felt the blackness creep into his vision. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in a shallow pool of water barely reaching his ankles. Looking around, he saw he was in some kind of sewer. He saw pipes running through the corridors, which seemed to be leaking small red droplets where when they hit the water, they hissed before turning into the same blue as the rest of the water. Felling a draw, he continued down the darkened paths before coming to a large cage with a piece of paper with a kanji for seal on it. Looking on in awe, he saw that there was something large behind the cage but couldn't make it out as it hid in the darkness. But before he could do anything, a deep rumbling voice echoed throughout the room. So my jailer finally comes to mock me. It snarled as it leaned forward, smiling slightly as it saw fear and also defiance as he saw who it was. Naruto almost shit himself when he saw the thing that attacked the village behind the cage. Before his mind started to run a mile a minute before realizing what he was and why his Gigi told him about Jinchurikis. He was one. No demon could beat if the Aikibi could, and how could the Kyuubi be? Looking at the creature in front of him in defiance, he was about to speak before Kyuubi spoke again. Ah, so you have figured out what you are. So pitiful to be stuck in one so young and weak. What I would do to return to Makai, the Kyuubi growled out as it glared down at his young host. Naruto blinked before he smiled sadly, confusing the Kyuubi a great deal, but before it could make a scathing remark towards the blonde, he spoke first. So you just want to go home, Naruto said as he smiled sadly, receiving a growl and a begrudging nod. Closing his eyes, he let out a sigh before giving a small prayer for even thinking of this. Looking back at the fox without a hint of fear, he said, "Would you swear on whatever soul you have in your throne in Makai that you will never return to the elemental nations ever again, from now until the end of time?" Naruto stated as he looked at the fox. Kyuubi was taken aback and unconsciously licked its lips, seeing a way out of the prison. Not even thinking, it swore, "I swear on my throne and soul to never return to these damned nations until the end of time," it replied while its tail started to swish back and forth in anticipation. Naruto looked at the Kyuubi for a minute longer before nodding and started to walk towards the cage, slowly stepping on invisible steps as he made his way towards the tag. As he reached up to tear it off, he felt a hand wrap around his waist before he was pulled back from the cage as the Kyuubi roared, "You!" It snarled as it tried lunging for the man who put him in the prison. Naruto looked up to see the disapproving face of the Yondaime Hokage Minato Namikaze. "Naruto, why were you going to release the Kyuubi? You know it would destroy Konoha," he said as he set Naruto down. Naruto felt something snap inside of him at that look, and the way he said it made Naruto mad. Naruto snapped out, "Why would you care? You left me in this hell as you got off scot-free. You bastard, don't you dare tell me what I should or shouldn't do. You don't know who I am or what this village has done to me, and for your information, I was getting rid of the problem once and for all." At this, Minato was confused before saying, "Wait, you don't know who I am? And what do you mean getting rid of the problem?" he asked, bewildered. Naruto this time glared even harder before saying, "You're the Yondaime Hokage Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash, the man who sealed the Kyuubi in a just-born orphan with no parents." Naruto had enough and started to think hard. Minato was confused. How did Naruto not know he was his son, and what happened to Kushina? Did something happen to her? But before he could say something, a cage just like the Kyuubi's appeared around him as his son walked around the cage. Fearing what he was about to do, he said, "No, I meant that I'm your father," he yelled out. Naruto stopped at hearing those words, but then it all clicked together. The Hokage could never ask someone else to do what he needed to do. Giving a small sob as a few tears before rubbing them away, he rose a little higher before turning back towards the late Hokage. "I grew up with no parents, no last name, and I am hated by almost everyone inside this village except for a given few. You have no right to call yourself a father. You lost those rights the second you sealed and left this child to the wolves. And the answer to your earlier question, I made a deal with the Kyuubi. He will never return to these lands for all time, and the price is his freedom. I'll die, but I will die showing the village I'm not the Kyuubi." With that, Naruto continued on his path, slowly starting to climb towards the seal, leaving a silently crying Minato and heading towards a thoughtful Kyuubi. Reaching up, he started to grab the seal. Before looking at the Kyuubi, he said, "You are not to harm any citizen of Konoha when you are released, even the ones beating me right now." At this, Minato's head snapped up with wide tear-streaked eyes. Someone from his village was beating his son right now. The Kyuubi growled but nodded its head begrudgingly. Taking a deep breath, he ripped the seal away from the cage only to be blasted back as the Kyuubi let out a mighty roar before everything went black. The drunks started to get tired as the Kyuubi brat passed out but wanted one last chance to get a hit in, but before they could, they were blasted back as red chakra exploded from the bloody and broken body. Across the village, civilians soiled themselves as they fell, the malevolent chakra that they felt 6 years ago reappear. Though the ninjas of the village felt fear as they dropped what they were doing as they rushed towards the source of the chakra explosion. The Sandaime Hokage Hiruzen Sarutobi feared for Naruto's life as he disappeared from his office, leaving an orange book to fall to the ground. Rushing as quick as he could towards the small forest, he could see the pillar of orange fiery chakra start to take shape of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Upon landing he noticed all the Chunins and higher arrive with weapons at the ready to fight the beast, but he knew that they would lose. He couldn't replicate Minato's seal work. He noticed Kushina Uzumaki standing with the assorted group glaring at the forming chakra. Slowly the body formed before the head took shape, followed by the tails. That was when he noticed that only 7 tails formed behind the Kyuubi, and then it let out a mighty roar as the ground shook. Freedom! It roared as it looked down to the assorted ninjas before snorting in disgust. Looking down at the bloody form of Naruto, it slowly lowered its snout to the body. Sarutobi feared it was about to eat the body of its old host before it did something that threw him for a loop. Kyuubi sniffed at the body before letting out a deep laughter. So the brat is alive. Like mother like son, Kushina. It asked as it glared at its former host, who only glared back, much to the confusion of the surrounding ninja. Before Sarutobi could give the order to attack, hoping to drive the beast away from Naruto's apparently still alive body, it started speaking again. I will not go back on my oath to child. You will no longer fear the Kyuubi. It said before a black portal opened above its head before it leapt through the hole for it to swallow the Kyuubi before disappearing again into nothingness. All the surrounding ninja looked around in confusion before the cheers started to ring out through many of them. The Sandaime wasn't cheering though. He appeared by Naruto before reappearing at the hospital. Arriving in the main lobby, he turned to the nearest nurse. Get the doctors here. He is extremely injured. He nearly yelled as the nurse scurried off before returning with rushing doctors who were wheeling a stretcher, to which Hiruzen laid Naruto down gently before they rushed him towards the emergency room. Letting out a deep sigh, Sarutobi sank into a waiting chair as his thoughts circled around what had happened earlier. What did the Kyuubi mean by oath, and why did Naruto release the Kyuubi? His thoughts couldn't find an answer and knew he would need to talk to Naruto if he survived this ordeal. He felt a body slide down into the chair next to his. Sliding his eyes, he was surprised to see it was Kakashi. What brings you here, Kakashi-kun? He asked tiredly. Kakashi seemed slightly stressed before he bowed his head. We found 6 drunken civilians where Naruto was. And here Sarutobi's blood ran cold as his mind took in the information. They confessed to giving chase to Naruto when he seemed to have wandered into District 36. Naruto led them on a chase before finally losing them in the forest for 30 minutes or so before they found him again, upon where they started to beat him. The Sandaime's fears were confirmed before he launched himself from his chair before he felt a hand grab his wrist. Looking back to glare at Kakashi, the Scarecrow said, "We have them in cells waiting for you, but for now wait for Naruto," he said seriously before letting go of the Hokage's wrist as the Sandaime fell back into his chair. I really messed up this time, Kakashi. The Sandaime let out as silent tears started to run down his cheeks. I should have assigned a Anbu guard to watch out for Naruto and maybe this wouldn't have happened. He let out a sigh before he felt another presence. Looking up, he saw that it was Kushina Uzumaki. Slightly growling, he said, "What are you doing here, Uzumaki-san?" Kushina looked at the Hokage before saying, "I'm here to see how my son is doing," she said before she felt herself slammed against the wall and was held by the throat. Looking down the arms, she saw it was the Sandaime with an angry fire burning in his eyes. You gave up the right to call him son when you signed the papers. You lost all rights when you abandoned him. You will leave this hospital at once, and if I even hear you came here again, I'll have you thrown into a deep dark cell for the rest of your miserable life." Sarutobi ground out as he released her before she shushined away with a look of fear in her eyes. Turning around, Sarutobi growled as he sat down, "I can't believe the nerve of that woman. I still can't believe she threw him away, and also having the doctors edit his genes so he couldn't be linked back to her and Minato." His started crushing the armrests before letting out a deep sigh. Looking to his left, he saw Kakashi seemed to be glaring into the distant wall. Sitting back, he looked at the ceiling and got ready for a long wait. While it took nearly 6 hours, nearing midnight, the Sandaime and Kakashi were still waiting. Surprisingly few people showed up to see how Naruto was doing. His son Asuma stopped for a bit before leaving to continue with his mission. The only other to appear were the Ichirakus. While they tried to stay long, Tsuki had to get his sleeping daughter home. The Hokage was surprised when the Anbu Neko arrived to see how Naruto was doing. While he had her watch Naruto a few times while he had meetings, he didn't think they formed any kind of relationship. It seemed that the young blonde thought she was his Nei-chan, which he gave a good laugh, much to the embarrassment to Neko, but she still had to continue with her patrol. Not soon after she left did the light switch from red to green and a worn doctor walked towards the Hokage before giving a tired smile. "We managed to save him, but I'm surprised we managed that with all his injuries," he said sadly. He pulled out a clipboard before motioning Sarutobi and Kakashi to follow him. Arriving to the intensive care ward, he opened a door allowing both of them to enter before shutting it. Walking towards the sleeping blonde, he started to speak. He had 3 broken ribs, a cracked skull, both legs were broken and had multiple gashes across his body. Before sighing as he looked at the Hokage, he continued, "He had severe chakra poisoning. We lost him 2 times, but we managed to revive him in time." The Hokage frowned at the information before looking at the sleeping blonde, but his eyes widened when he noticed the changes. Seeing where the old Hokage was looking, the doctor said, "I see you notice the changes. Once the Kyuubi left his body, his whiskers disappeared, but that's not the only thing. He seemed to have aged 2 years. This both the Hokage and Kakashi turned wide-eyed at the doctor before Kakashi managed to ask, "How?" Here the doctor frowned before looking back towards Naruto. "I can only speculate, but I think that the seal attempted to do its job of absorbing the Kyuubi's chakra while it obviously failed, but not before stripping the Kyuubi of 2 of its tails. While his body tried to adjust to the sudden influx of yokai, it aged to accommodate the excess chakra. For all purposes, Naruto here is a 6-year-old with an 8-year-old body," he said, letting out a long yawn. Hiruzen saw the yawn and smiled thankfully to the doctor. "Thank you, Higurashi-san, for saving Naruto. You can go get some rest, you deserve it after tonight," he said while taking a seat near Naruto's bed. The man gave a bow before excusing himself from the room to get some sleep. Kakashi looked at Naruto for a second, but before he could take another seat, Sarutobi spoke up. "Kakashi, go home and get some sleep. I will notify you when he wakes." Kakashi was about to protest before the stressful day finally caught up to him as he noticed how tired he was before giving a bow to the Hokage before shushing away to his apartment. Sitting back, he took deep breath before saying sadly to the sleeping form of Naruto, "I swear, Naruto, when you wake up, I won't keep no more secrets from you." He closed his eyes getting ready for a long nap before a soft voice made him snap his eyes open. "Then let's start now, Gigi," Naruto said as his eyes were open but held pain and tiredness that shouldn't be seen on one so young. Sarutobi let a small tear roll down his cheek before giving a small smile at still being called Gigi, turning serious. "I guess you realized what you used to be." Getting a confirming nod, he sat back and sighed, but before he spoke, Naruto beat him to it. Naruto felt sad at see his Gigi cry but stopped him before he could blame himself for all this. "I understand why you hid it from me, wanting me to try and have a normal childhood, but that wasn't supposed to be. What I want to know is who was my mother, seeing as how I already met my so-called father," Naruto said sadly before looking at the gob-smacked Hokage, letting out a small giggle at the look on his face. Sarutobi didn't know how Naruto met his father but decided to ask, "How did you meet him, Naruto?" "He tried stopping me from releasing the Kyuubi," Naruto said as he saw the Hokage flinch. Seeing as how the Hokage didn't know what had gone on in his head, he clarified, "I made a deal with Kyuubi. It will never return to the elemental nations." He swore on his throne and soul, "Am I guessing he left right?" "Was anyone injured?" Naruto asked fearfully at the thought of another Kyuubi massacre. Sarutobi saw the look of fear but quickly washed it away as he said, "No one was injured. The Kyuubi left almost as soon as he left your body, but we have apprehended the villagers who attacked you." Naruto let out a relieved sigh before looking at the Hokage. I understand why you lied to me about my father. I know that the Yondaime had many enemies, and if they learned he had a child they would start another war, but what happened to my mother? He asked sadly. Hiruzen was at a loss of words at how mature Naruto was acting. Before giving a grim frown he said, I had promised so I'll keep it. Your mother was Kushina Uzumaki from Whirlpool Country before it was destroyed by Iwa during the Third Great Ninja War. She was the former host of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. When you were born the Kyuubi managed to break free attacking anything in sight. Here he took a deep breath before dropping the bad news. After Minato managed to seal the Kyuubi in you, she seemed to have changed, growing hatred at the Kyuubi for taking away her husband. Here Naruto began to understand where his Gigi was going. She destroyed all the birth certificates and had a few shady doctors rearranged your genes so you couldn't be traced back to her and Minato. Naruto wanted to cry but he couldn't. His Gigi was telling him the truth the entire time. He was an orphan with no last name and no parents. Gripping the sheets with his small hands, he let out a long sigh before saying to his Gigi, I understand that she is feeling pain but still doesn't give her a right to abandon me. Here the Hokage was about to interrupt but Naruto held up a hand silencing him. I am just another orphan caused by the Kyuubi attack, but I will make a name for myself. I will walk my own path. All I ask is that you start to teach me what you know about seals. Here Naruto let out a smile as he grinned at the Hokage. Hiruzen couldn't be more prouder of Naruto than ever. He had taken all the news but still held a determination to prove everyone wrong. Nodding he said, I will Naruto-kun, but why are you acting so mature? He asked as he beamed at his grandson in all but blood. Naruto sat up from his bed as he rubbed the crust from his eyes before heading to the dresser, pulling out a pair of gray sweatpants before opening another drawer grabbing a great shirt before getting dressed. This had become routine for him when he started to train ever since he got out of the hospital after that fateful day 6 years ago. Opening the door he was slightly chilled by the cool morning air. Taking a deep breath he looked out across the city before jumping off the edge of his veranda before sticking to the side of the wall before running down. Getting to the bottom a minute later he started to take off in a light jog through the deserted morning streets, giving off a slight smile he thought while running, today is the day I pass as he nodded to a few Anbu doing the morning patrol. While Naruto may have been training for some reason he could never do the Bushin. No matter how long he trained his chakra control he seemed to always have trouble getting too little chakra in them. While Naruto was sad that he failed the test 2 times before because of this reason he had been practicing all week to get it down pat. He had changed these last 6 years. He lost all his baby fat due to the workout he did every day. Because of this his muscles were lean. Also due to the incident in which he was subsequently aged 2 years he appeared to be around the age of 17, making him easily the oldest of his class now. He stood a good 2 feet taller than the tallest in his class making him 6 feet. But he wasn't only just training his body all these years no, his Gigi kept his promise and passed on his knowledge on seals to the young blonde, even going as so far as to say he passed him in that field. While he stopped learning seals after creating the ones he needed for his projects, yes Naruto did return for the book he left in that forest thanking Kami that it wasn't crushed by the Kyuubi. He went on to learn the weird language known as English then went on to read any book he could find in the military base. What he learned down there made Naruto who he was today. He found out that the base was just a small outpost for a group called Rangers. He was odd at first learning that they trained to be the fiercest warriors and when he learned about the weapons and technology that was left behind he was positively giddy. But few obstacles cropped up when he learned that the aircraft and vehicles needed energy to run, which was why he created new seals just made for them. While very complex they were simple, just a mix of a storage seal, a low expulsion seal, and bam! New power source. While he still kept the secret from anyone, he had a backup plan if he somehow failed the test again. He found the weapons there deadly and made him fear what would happen if they fell into the wrong hands, so he had created another seal for the guns to where they wouldn't fired if you didn't channel chakra into it, but the clincher was it could be attuned to a person's chakra, so no henge or doppelganger could fire them, that and a few security seals that would be harmful to anyone not tuned to the weapon. He couldn't class himself in any ninja standards because he wasn't training in ninja standards. He would call himself a ranger when he finally passed the exam while serving and protecting Konoha. Seeing the sun start to rise, he ran back to his apartment to get ready for his last academy day. Sitting in the back of the classroom, Naruto was dressed in another clean sweatpants and a gray shirt with black bold letters reading, Ranger, on the front. While it confused many as to why he would wear such a thing, he just ignored the question's looks as the class slowly filed in one by one. Nobody dared sit by the strange boy as he was the oldest of them and seemed to always have a serious look in his eyes despite the cheerful smile that was on his face. He also earned a reputation to being ruthless in sparing that would be shared by all, even one Uchiha Sasuke. His strength added to his height made a few students straight out refuse to spar with him until the teachers were forced to do it, but he always lacked in the jutsu department due to always training in his weapons. Once the class had filed in, Yumino Iruka stood from behind his desk. At once all the students hushed as he said, "Today we test all of you to see if you have what it takes to become genin of Konohagakure." Here he paused before smiling. "I have faith that you will all pass. Now when your name is called, please enter the next room to be tested." Slowly the numbers started to dwindle as each student was called before only Naruto was left sitting with a nervous Yamanaka Ino who kept nervously glancing at the older boy. Naruto saw her glances before his name was called. He started to walk down the stairs, but he stopped halfway down before turning to the blonde. "Don't be nervous, Yamanaka-san. You trained for this, so you should pass easily." He gave a grin to her before continuing on, not noticing the blush that adorned her face. Entering the room, he saw Iruka and his assistant Mizuki sitting behind a desk. Before Iruka spoke, "Naruto, could you perform the henge?" Naruto grinned before he made the ram seal. Before a puff of smoke appeared before a tiger stood where Naruto once was. Before Naruto reappeared again grinning. Iruka smiled before marking his score. "Now the kawarimi." Naruto focused before switching with a chair in the corner, then back looking at the teachers. He saw a smiling Iruka and the same with Mizuki, but he noticed a flash of anger cross his face for a brief second. Frowning on the inside, he barely heard Iruka say to do the bushin. Mizuki was angry. He needed the brat to fail. Looking to see if Iruka was looking, he did a small genjutsu to disrupt Naruto. Smiling as a dead-looking clone appeared next to Naruto, he switched it with a sad look, but not before Naruto caught the look. Iruka looked sad as he said, "I'm sorry Naruto, but you fail." But he was interrupted by the blonde. "But Iruka-sensei, let me try again, I know I can do it." Naruto ground out, but only to get a negative in response. Standing there for a second in disbelief, he stood rigid before realizing he had to go to plan B. He turned and marched out of the classroom without a second look back. Walking out into the courtyard where many of the students who passed were being congratulated by many of their parents, Naruto wasn't really sad that he didn't pass, knowing that he was sabotaged, but who would believe a student over a teacher? Sighing, he started to walk towards the gate to begin another jog around the city to help clear his mind. He smiled and nodded to a few passerbys before he saw Ino wearing her headband around her waist, making his way towards where she and Nara Shikamaru along with Akamichi Choji were standing with their parents, who were talking amongst themselves. Giving a slight cough to get their attention, he smiled before saying, "Congratulations you three on passing. I think many are wanting a new Ino Shika Cho group." Seeing that these old men look like they want to retire, giving off a laugh at seeing the eyebrows twitch at being called old. Ino was about to congratulate Naruto on passing before Shikamaru touched her arm to stop her. That was when she realized she didn't see a headband anywhere. Instead, Shikamaru spoke up for her. Troublesome, you didn't pass Naruto. He asked, confused as how the boy didn't pass. He easily was able to fight most shunins to a standstill. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck, giving off a laugh. Yeah, I wasn't able to throw off the genjutsu quick enough to do the bushin, he said, smiling, hoping they caught on, which he saw the three adults all to look at him at what he said. Genjutsu wasn't part of the graduation exam. Even Shikamaru caught on. Ino seemed slightly downtrodden at the news before she said, well, you should have better luck next year, Naruto. Naruto shook his head while saying, no, Ino, I won't be returning to the academy next year. My path leads to a different path than a shinobi. He saw the shocked looks on the three faces while calculating ones on the adults. Turning, he started to leave while saying, sorry, but I have to get back to my run. Remember to always watch each other's back in the field. As he walked away, Shikaku was thinking of what just transpired, as was Inoichi and Shuza. The kid apparently knew he was sabotaged but wasn't fighting the ruling he was unjustly given. Shikaku turned to his son, who was looking at the retreating blonde's back before saying, who was that, Shikamaru? Shikamaru turned to his dad saying, that was Naruto. From what I know, he failed the exam twice before to the same reason of not being able to do the bushin, but his grades should have been enough for him to pass. Here he saw his dad confused before he explained, Naruto is undefeated in the sparring ring. While he lacks in his ninjutsu, I saw him earlier this week with a completed bushin, he said, confused as to how Naruto would fail. They all looked back to see the young teen stretching before taking off in a jog following some random direction. Naruto didn't get far before he noticed someone tailing him. Stopping, he said, you can come out now. Mizuki stepped out from an alley with a smile before he said, I knew you should have passed, Naruto. Iruka was wrong for failing you. Would you like to try taking a makeup exam? He hoped Naruto would take the bait. Naruto's mind was reeling. He knew there was no such thing as a makeup exam. Deciding to play along to see if he could learn anything else, he nodded. Yeah, I would like to. What do I need to do? He asked in what could be a hopeful voice. Mizuki grinned. Hook, line and sinker, he thought, unaware that Naruto was already onto him. All you have to do is sneak into the Hokage tower and take a scroll without being caught. If you do that and learn a jutsu, you will be allowed to pass. Naruto nodded his head, listening to the description of the scroll, quickly realizing it was the forbidden scroll of sealing. He knew he had to notify the Hokage of the traitor, but couldn't pass up the chance to learn a new jutsu from the scroll. He thanked Mizuki before continuing on with his run, a plan already starting to form in his mind. He knew that he was going to be walking a thin line and hoped his Gigi didn't get too mad at him for this. As the sun started to set, Naruto made his way home to get one thing he needed if he was going to survive whatever Mizuki had planned. He closed all his curtains in his small apartment before making sure no one had sneaked in. He went to the bathroom to a blank piece of wall below the sink. Before giving his finger a small cut, he slid it along the blank piece of wall as a seal appeared. The wall crumbled to show a silver suitcase in the wall. Pulling it out, he sat it on the sink before wiping some more blood along another seal before the case popped open to reveal a digital camouflage jacket and pants. Grabbing the clothes, he shut the case before walking into the other room. He started to get dressed. Instead of his regular running shoes or ninja sandals, he put on tan-colored combat boots. Making sure they were tied tightly, he opened the case again to pull out a holster. Looping it through his belt, he pulled out the last item in the case. It was a 9mm pistol, the only one he kept in his house in case anything happened. Releasing the clip, he made sure it had bullets in it before sliding it back into the gun with an audible click. He slid it into his holster. Nodding, he left his apartment and started to head towards the Hokage tower, carefully avoiding passing patrols and pedestrians. He knew the Hokage usually had a small meeting tonight with the Shinobi Council to go over the recent graduations. He slipped in through the window before carefully knocking out the Anbu guarding the room that thankfully was looking at the door and not the window this time. He walked towards a side door before opening it. Seeing the large scroll laying on its resting place, he carefully removed it before using some string to tie it to his back. He exited the door before heading to the Hokage's desk. Writing a quick note, he started to leave before he needed to at least make sure the Hokage read the note. Quickly he turned to the knocked out Anbu before grabbing a single kunai. He flung it to a seal on the door. He jumped out the window as an alarm started to ring. Hiruzen Sarutobi was sitting in a large room surrounded by many junins who were going to be senseis to this year batch. He was saddened to hear that Naruto had failed again to do the Bushin, but he knew that Naruto would try again next year as he rarely stopped. As the meeting started to wind down, Shikaku stood to speak. "Hokage-sama, I wanted to bring something to your attention," he said as he has a serious look on his face. Now the Hiruzen was intrigued. He didn't hear the customary troublesome from him, so he knew it had to be serious as the room quieted to hear what he had to say. And what would that be, Shikaku? Shikaku sighed before he said, "It's about a failed student, Naruto." Now everyone was paying attention to the one host of the Kyuubi. Seeing the Hokage nod, he continued, "Today when I was congratulating my son and his friends on passing, we were approached by Naruto-san, who congratulated them on passing, but he seemed to have failed again. All the Junin knew this. It was surprising to them that the blonde had failed, as they had seen him training one way or another. Now that was surprising thing, it was how he said he failed. He said he didn't get rid of the genjutsu in time to complete a Bushin. That threw up red flags for everyone in the room. But Shikaku continued, "Then I was just thinking he was making an excuse for not passing, but I decided to dig into it by asking my son about him." The Hokage was thinking of the possible things. He knew Naruto wouldn't make excuses for why he failed. He was saddened that he didn't keep up with Naruto's progress as much lately. "What did you find out, Shikaku?" Shikaku gave a small troublesome before continuing, "I learned that Naruto-san was above his grade in taijutsu. He wasn't even competing against students but rather the teachers instead. He was lacking in ninjutsu, but I don't see a problem in him passing due to taijutsu only, as in the case of Guy's student Rock Lee." Here he nodded to the Junin sensei of Team 9, who nodded back in understanding. But here he sighed, "But that isn't what has me worried." When asked if he was going to go back next year, he replied that his path leads somewhere other than the path of shinobi, which raises my fear that Naruto-san has finally given up on being a shinobi, and I for one see a potentially strong ninja quit because of sabotage. This shocked many of the surrounding Junin, especially the Hokage, seeing as how Naruto always wanted to be a ninja for the leaf, but to quit, it was impossible. Hiruzen was saddened to hear Naruto had finally gave up, but before he could reply, alarms started to ring throughout the building. Jumping from his seat, he quickly made his way to his office. Upon entering, he saw a awakening Anbu and the door to the scroll room opened. Fearing what could be missing, he went into it for his fears to be confirmed. Closing the door, he walked to his desk saying in a serious tone, "The forbidden scroll has been taken. I want all of you to know T." He cut off as he saw a note left on his desk. Opening, he read it, much to the confusion of the Junin. "Dear Gigi, I have the scroll. Don't get mad or send a search party because I'm currently trying to oust a traitor. I know you're confused as to whom the traitor could be, but it's Mizuki. He interfered during my test, making me fail. After leaving the academy, I was approached by him about a makeup exam. Bullshit, I know, so I played along. I plan on meeting him tonight and interrogating him about who his true master is. As you have already more than likely found out from Shikaku that I intend to not keep on going as a shinobi, I have a reason. I have been keeping a closely guarded secret from everyone. It's not bad, but it will change Konoha for the better. I just ask that you trust me in this as I have trusted you all my life. I'll let you know everything tonight when I'm done, but I couldn't pass up the chance to learn something from the scroll equals P. But seriously, I'm going to be at the tag shack. Give it an hour or two before Mizuki shows." Love. Naruto. Hiruzen read through the note before smiling. He was afraid of what Naruto would learn, but if he knew him it would likely be the Kage Bushin. But that raised a question as to what Naruto was hiding. He knew it was fair for payback but was still hurt. Guess the shoe was on the other foot now. Turning to the assorted Junin who were looking on curiously at to why the Hokage would stop talking, they saw him smile before saying, "You can return to your homes, the situation is already under control." Kakashi realized the importance of the scroll, so he had to ask, "How is it under control, Hokage-sama?" Sarutobi chuckled as he said, "Right now a traitor is being flushed out, and the scroll is going to be returned safely in a few hours, you're all dismissed." The Junin left through the door thinking as to who was doing this mission and who the traitor was. A few were thinking of going to the INT to see if they could learn anything tomorrow. After the last one left, Hiruzen turned to the now standing at attention Anbu. "Gather a small squad and be ready to leave with me in 2 hours to apprehend a prisoner." The Anbu nodded as he disappeared to gather the squad. Hiruzen sat back in his chair before pulling out a small orange book before giggling perversely, and still hoping Naruto would be alright. Naruto was slightly breathing hard, but he had finally mastered the Kage Bushin, but he realized too quick that for some reason it had adverse effects. He was surprised at first, but it just made his plan B so much more achievable. He just hoped that his Gigi had some answers. That's when he noticed a group of Anbu appear hidden in the trees along with the Hokage. Giving a signal to wait, he felt Mizuki's chakra getting closer to the area. He sat down on the scroll as Mizuki appeared through the trees. Mizuki didn't believe the brat actually did it but grinned as he said, "Good job Naruto, now give me the scroll so I can notify the Hokage you passed." Fat chance, he thought as he watched Naruto stand, but what happened next shocked everyone around. Naruto stood before pulling his pistol. He fired 2 rounds into the monk's leg as he fell to the ground screaming as blood started to pour from the wounds. The Anbu and Hokage were shaking the ringing from their ears, not believing what they saw. Naruto pulled some contraption from a holster before it fired something that their eyes couldn't track. Naruto said as he started walking towards the cussing man on the ground, "I know you're a traitor, Mizuki. Now I want you to tell me who you are working for," he said as he stood above the man with a frown on his face. Mizuki couldn't move his legs as the pain was unbearable. "What the did you do to me?" he ground out as his arm started to reach for a kunai, hoping to stab the brat as he stood close to him. He was screamed again as the arm he was using to grab the kunai as a piercing pain as it was shot. Now it hung limply at its side. "This is what called a gun, also a 9mm standard issue pistol," Naruto said before pressing the barrel of the gun into the monk's neck as he screamed in pain as the hot barrel burned a circle into the monk's neck. "Now I won't ask again, who are you working for?" Naruto said as he pulled the gun away from the man. "You," was the intelligent reply before another shot rang out. Mizuki's other arm hung loosely as he laid on the ground before the hot barrel was pressed into the other side of his neck. "Who are you working for?" Naruto said as he waited for the heaving man to talk. Hiruzen couldn't believe his eyes. Naruto had technology that could do things only people could dream of, and he feared Naruto had changed, but soon realized that he was interrogating someone and couldn't show weakness. They had lost a very promising shinobi, but he realized that Naruto was going to come clean after all this. Mizuki knew he couldn't stand much more pain, so he decided to give the brat what he wanted to. He wouldn't use that thing on him anymore. "Orochimaru, damn it. It's Orochimaru," he yelled out. Naruto nodded, satisfied with the answer before he backhanded Mizuki with the pistol, knocking him out. Turning to the trees, he said, "He's knocked out but needs medical attention soon before he bleeds out." He walked back to the scroll as the Anbu appeared along with the Hokage. Grabbing the scroll, he tossed it to one of the Anbu while smiling to the Hokage. "So what did you think, Gigi? Am I good actor?" He laughed a little at the nod he received in return. The Hokage gave the Anbu orders as they disappeared to do their respectful tasks. Turning back to Naruto, Sarutobi adopted a serious face, as did Naruto. I see we have much to discuss, Naruto-kun, he said seriously. Yes, we do, Hokage-sama, Naruto said as he threw the old man for a loop before turning and beckoning the Hokage to follow him. That was when Hiruzen was able to take in the change of clothes of Naruto. He never saw anything like it before, and it seemed to be made of durable material. He started to pay attention to as Naruto spoke. I promised you I would tell you everything I will, but let's first get to a safe location. He turned his head to see the Hokage nod. He continued, I have a plan that you should like, and also will make Konoha easily the most powerful military village in the elemental nation. Now Sarutobi was intrigued by that. Konoha had recently fallen behind Kumo in that regard after the Kyuubi attack. They walked for about 30 minutes before they reached a small clearing that didn't seem special. Naruto turned to the Hokage before saying, Gigi, did you have one of your Anbu tell us? This threw the Hokage for a loop as he shook his head negatively. Before he could react, Naruto pulled the pistol from its harness and fired a shot into the trees. Branches breaking, a body fell out of the tree, landing on the ground in a heap. Naruto kept the weapon trained on the body as he and the shocked Hokage, who didn't even feel the presence of the spy, moved towards the body. Naruto kicked the body over to show a man in Anbu uniform with a plain white mask with a small hole in between the eyes as blood poured out with Nae on the front. Hiruzen growled at seeing that. Naruto turned to him questioningly. That is an operative for a supposedly disbanded group. Naruto nodded before pulling out a scroll sealing the body. Standing back up, he motioned the old Hokage to follow him as he went back to the middle of the clearing. He reached down and pulled a hidden door open, much to the shock of the Hokage. Letting him go in first, Naruto gave a quick look around before shutting the door behind them. Flipping a switch as he passed the Hokage, he starting to speak. Did you ever wonder where I disappeared after that group tried to attack me the first time all those years ago? Naruto asked as he started to make some tea for him and the old man. Hiruzen couldn't believe his eyes. They were in a small safe house that had a bed, dresser, stove, sink, and a small bathroom. He also noticed metal cabinets aligned on walls as he heard Naruto's question. I wondered but figured you were able to hide somewhere. Naruto sat down, waving towards the other man to take a seat opposite of him. You thought right, but I accidentally fell into a tunnel in which I rolled down into a massive cave. Now he had the Hokage's attention. He continued, what I found down there were things from before this era. Hell, probably before the rise of the elemental nations. Now the Hokage was intrigued. It was a military base that used to be home of just a small group of people known as Rangers. These men and women were trained to be the best to serve their country from enemies, foreign and domestic. They could act as bodyguards, military police, and hell, even up to assassin groups. But these people had technology that far surpassed anyone here has seen. He looked at the Hokage seriously as he said, I realized what would happen if these weapons fell into the wrong hands, so I kept it a closely guarded secret, as you can understand. Hiruzen was reeling at the information but nodded. I understand, Naruto. What you did was the right thing, but why hide it from me? He asked curiously. Because you would have told me to not return to it, and don't shake your head, you would have as duty as Hokage. Seeing the man begin to shake his head, he sighed, knowing Naruto was right. The teapot on the stove started to whistle, but Naruto didn't get up to grab it, surprising the old man as another Naruto appeared from the restroom to get the teapot before giving a cup to both of them before standing at attention in the corner. Naruto sighed after he took a sip before saying, but before we continue with this, I need your advice on something. Sarutobi sat the cup down as he said, and what would that be, Naruto-kun? Naruto turned to the clone and said, while I was mastering the Kage Bushin, it was going okay at first until I mastered it. Now it seems for some reason to have an effect on all the clones I make. Nodding to the clone, it turned around before grabbing a knife, as it started to plunge it down towards its leg. Hiruzen expected it to disappear in a poof of smoke like many regular cage bushin do, but was shocked as the knife entered the leg and blood started to seep out. For some reason my clones are real. They think for themselves as any normal person would, but when they get injured, or die they don't disappear. They have a tenth of my chakra in them, making them at least low Junin level reserves, and they replenish it like normal, he said as he saw the Hokage stand up and walking over to the clone before crouching down to remove the knife. Hiruzen pulled out the knife as he felt the blood seep out. Feeling it between his fingers, he couldn't tell the difference at all. Doing a minor healing jutsu, he healed the cut before taking a seat again, giving a calculating look to Naruto. Naruto said after he took another sip of tea, figuring Shikaku or Inoichi told you about me not wanting to continue as a shinobi is true. I haven't been training to become a ninja, my training has been to become a ranger, but with this new development I can say I have a better idea than before. Hiruzen saw the advantages of this, but he realized that Naruto would not get his chakra back from creating clones, and he voiced his thoughts, but what he got in reply had him coughing. For some reason I have about 3 kgs worth of chakra, but by my estimates I should be able to create 300 clones, Naruto said, grinning at the dumbstruck face of Sarutobi, but then he turned serious as he stood up. Walking towards the cabinets, he opened each one of them, pulling out a few scrolls from each one before sitting back. Done, he gave the Hokage a serious look. What I have planned is creating a separate military power for Konoha, not under the command of the council but under your full command. No council interference. We would serve Konoha but will only be loyal to you. He pulled a small scroll from the front of his pocket before handing it to the Hokage. That there is a contract, signed by me, awaiting your signature along with the fire daimyo, if he happens to sign it. The old Hokage opened the scroll, reading its contents. It was a contract, a well-worded on that had no loopholes. Naruto could be used for anything pretty much. He couldn't harm any Fire Nation resident unless in self-defense. He would answer to Sarutobi Hiruzen and would defend the nation from any threats. The new military force won't take part in any kind of invasion unless Naruto allowed it to. If he ever decided to recruit someone into the group, it would be at his discretion. Nodding, he was about to ask Naruto for a pen, but one was already held before him. Smiling, he wrote down his signature before rolling the scroll back up before handing it to Naruto. Naruto pocketed his scroll before raising one of the scrolls he grabbed. In these scrolls, along with the other, are all the weapons and vehicles I found on the base, along with uniforms and the like. He set the scroll down before continuing as he pulled out the pistol he had before he handed it to the Hokage. That there is my present to you. Channel chakra through it to fire it. Once you do it the first time, it will only be able to fire by you. I'll show you at a later time how it works, but I have seals on every weapon similar to yours, but I'll have them tuned to my chakra so my clones will be able to fire them. Hiruzen held the metal gun as Naruto called it in his hand, surprised at the weight before nodding as he channeled chakra into it, watching it glow for a second before stopping. Sliding it into his robes, he turned back to Naruto. Since I agree with this, what were these vehicles? As you call them? He asked. Naruto held up a different scroll and started. They range from different things. They're armored with metal and glass. The smallest on could resist a normal kunai, but if you threw a chakra enhanced one, it may be able to lodge itself in the metal and break through glass. The Hokage was surprised. He said that a smallest one could do that. But Naruto was still talking. The next are complete armored. You would need a high-powered explosive tag to even make a dent on those. Sarutobi was almost drooling at the possibilities. It could protect HVTs more easily than anything. He held up a different scroll and said, they had aircraft. As the name implies, they could soar through the air, even reaching speeds faster than a blink of an eye. While many of them were destroyed, I was able to salvage a few of them. Do you think the fire daimyo would be awake at this time of night? Naruto asked curiously. The Hokage looked at the clock on the wall, seeing it was only nearing 10 at night. He nodded. He should be still awake. Why? Naruto grinned as he said, well, I think showing off a bit is in order, but before we go, I want to ask, would it be okay to start construction on a base above the Hokage monument? Hiruzen let out a laugh at the thought before he started thinking, well, it should be okay. The area up there has been abandoned since of the long walks that put a strain on the residents, but what would you do about trespassers and spies that will surely come when they learn of this? Naruto smiled saying, there are seals to make a perimeter just like the one that surrounds Konoha, also a barrier seal will keep people out who aren't tied in. Hiruzen smiled at Naruto's knowledge of seals, and nodded. He stood as Naruto also stood. Naruto turned to the clone and said, gather the others, and get suited up, in a commanding voice to receive a salute in return, which caused the Hokage to raise an eyebrow to Naruto. Rubbing the back of his neck he said, that's how you answer or greet a commanding officer, so you might have to get used to it from my clones, could you wait a moment while I get ready? Receiving a nod he grabbed a scroll before unsealing the contents. While it looked like the flak jackets used by ninjas, it was different in design. This is body armor. Had a lot better protection against shrapnel and kunai, Naruto said as he knocked his hand against it. Hearing a solid thump, the Hokage was impressed. Naruto put on all the equipment before donning a tan hat. He then unsealed another pistol along with a bigger weapon. Seeing the questioning gaze of the Hokage, Naruto elaborated, this is AM4 carbine, has a 30-round clip, and fires 5.56 mm rounds instead of 9 mm rounds as the pistols do. There are weapons that fire even bigger rounds. One is called a sniper, but the proper name is M40A1, which can fire up to 700 yards. The Hokage saw the possibilities, seeing that if it fired from that range the person wouldn't need to get close to the target as ninjas had to. I would like to see it in action one day, Naruto-kun. Naruto grinned before saying, but you have already. Who do you think saved Uchiha Makoto before Itachi'd her? The Hokage froze at hearing that. Itachi had stumbled into his office, that saying he had managed to everyone except his mother and brother. When asked why he let his mother live, as it was the deal to only let Sasuke live, what he told them confused them to no end. Apparently, as Itachi was about to bring the sword down, he heard the window crack as his shoulder erupted in pain. Dropping his sword, he turned to see his attacker, only to find a hole in the window that faced the Hokage monument. He was forced to flee as his mother attempted to attack him with his own sword. That was you? Asked the Hokage in shock. Naruto turned serious as he said, yes, that was me. I know why you ordered Itachi to do it. The Hokage froze at hearing once of his deepest regrets, but as he was about to make an excuse, Naruto held up his hand. You did what was for the best, Gigi, but there were innocents among them. Makoto was one of them. I'll keep your secret, but anything this big happens again, you come to me, okay? Hiruzen nodded with a grim look on his face, so Naruto knew what being Hokage entailed. All of it, no just the rainbow and sunshine parts. Sliding a boonie on top of his low-cut hair, he nodded and let out a big grin as he passed the Hokage with a scroll. As they made their way back up the stairs, the Hokage was greeted by 3 other clones dressed assortedly, each carrying a different weapon, but the thing was all of them were wearing olive face masks. They seemed to be scanning the area, moving farther out as Naruto appeared. Naruto said as he unrolled the scroll, what you're getting to see is one of the aircraft I have. It's a UH-60, it can carry 8 passengers along with 3 crewmen, and I have it set up to where it can stay in the air for 15 hours. He finished just as a large puff of smoke appeared above the fallen scroll. Hiruzen couldn't believe his eyes. The thing was something he never even imagined in his long life. Naruto saw the awestruck look as he began walking to it. We got another one, where this came from, and a different one. He laughed at the shocked look as the group got into the chopper. Sitting in the pilot seat, Naruto motioned for Sarutobi to take the seat opposite of him as he showed him how to strap on his safety harness. He turned and saw the clones he had were ready, flipping switches as the whine of the engine started. the blades start to spin as they became a blur, but before they could lift off, he watched Sarutobi create a shadow clone as it disappeared in a blur. Naruto looked questioningly to the Hokage, who replied, "To notify the Anbu to be on high alert," he said loudly over the roar of the engines. The aircraft slowly began to take off, much to the amazement of the old man. He watched as the village started to shrink before they start to fly southeast towards the capital. Hiruzen watched as Naruto flew the contraption with ease. He gave a soft smile at how he grew up to be this man. It only soon ended after an hour's flight, much to the shock of the Hokage, but his mind started to adjust to being open to all these new things. As they flew to the capital, Sarutobi feared about the welcome they would receive as he was about to ask Naruto to land, but saw Naruto point towards the nose of the chopper, which had a white painting of the leaf emblem. Naruto yelled at one of the clones who appear next to them. Naruto flipped a switch before exiting the chair, motioning the old man to do so as the clone took a seat. Naruto and the Hokage stood at the side exit as they held on to the surface with chakra. As the chopper slowed and began to lower, Sarutobi saw about 30 samurai along with 6 shinboi weapons held at the ready. Naruto jumped off first, followed by the Hokage along with a clone before the chopper took off again, flying off to a near mountain range. The assorted group couldn't believe their eyes. They were ready for combat, but then they saw the Konoha emblem. Then the Hokage stepped out by what seemed like 2 people on wearing olive face mask and the other to be what looked like a teen. The Hokage went towards the nearest shinobi, who looked wearily at the Hokage. Sarutobi looked at him seriously as he said, "Passcode 846973, watching the man flinch before signaling the rest to stand down. "What are you doing here, Hokage-sama, if you don't mind me asking?" asked the grizzled shinobi as he stood at attention. Sarutobi looked at Naruto before saying, "I need to speak to Daimyo-sama about important matters that have come up recently, and it's the utmost importance to discuss it as soon as we can." Nodding, he sent a runner to the daimyo to let him know of the situation as the man motioned for them to follow. He kept quiet as the group of 3 followed silently behind him as they neared the daimyo's study. Opening the door, he allowed the 3 to enter, signaling for 2 to post guard outside before following them in before shutting the door and locking it. The fire daimyo sat behind the desk with his fingers intertwined before his face, hiding his frown. He was surprised, however, when both the teen and other one snapped to attention before raising their arm to form what looked like a way of greeting. He nodded his head to them before they released the form. Dropping his hands, he asked, "What is it you wanted to discuss, Hokage Dono?" Sarutobi smiled as he said, "I wanted to discuss the contract that will greatly improve Konoha's and the Fire Nation's military power and defense." He turned to Naruto, who seemed to be having a silent discussion with the clone. He was about to ask for the scroll, when Naruto spoke up, "Daimyo-sama, do you have anyone else stationed in this room, apart from us 5? Daimyo looked confused at the question as he replied, "No, I make sure for all personal meetings to have Tori-san here." As he said that, a blur leapt from the corner, making its way to the door. The man named Tori saw it and jumped in front to block his path, but was knocked aside as the spy attempted to make a break. However, a crack rang through the air as the blur slammed into the ground as the guards slammed the door open looking for the threat. What they found instead was a body slide to a halt in front of them. Blood pouring from its head, they looked up to see the teen have a contraption raised with smoke drifting out of the barrel. Naruto looked out across the city. The last month had been eventful. Ever since the Fire Daimyo signed the contract, plans for the base constructing commenced the next day. While they had just finished it yesterday, already it was abuzz with life from the daily training of all the clones. He remembered when he was there with the 3rd Hokage as he created all of them before giving them their duties. Flashback. Naruto stood on top of the now empty Hokage monument as he put his fingers in a cross symbol as he said aloud, "Kage Bushin." Before them 300 puffs of smoke appeared, All were Naruto's clad in only boxers before snapping to attention. Naruto grinned as he said, "Today is a glorious day for Konoha. We're going to become her shield and sword. You will all be assigned to your division. Any questions?" Receiving none, he walked to the first group of 50. 35 of you are going to be a part of the armored group. Get your equipment and clothing. Your bunk number will be on the bags. He pointed to the large group of neatly filed bag. The clones saluted before going to get their gear and heading to get dressed. He continued as he divided the group of 300 into these: 35 armored group, 28 air group, 84 medical group, which would be taking classes at the hospital tomorrow, and 4 groups of 25 aptly named Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. He smiled as the Konoha Rangers were born. End flashback. Bravo and Charlie had taken up the mantle of Konoha's military police, after the first few incidents, in which they were broken up quickly and efficiently. The lawless part of Konoha learned that the law was again enforced. The patrols of the new troops freed up the Anbu and Chunins of that duty, allowing them to take more missions. The medical classes had gone smoothly as 50 doctors made the new hospital on the base their home. 34 field medics were assigned to different squads. Delta was spaced out across 10 teams of 2 were scouting the other nations, setting up a small spy network along the way, with 5 wandering around Fire Country assisting towns whenever they could. Alpha was there for the defense of Konoha and a quick response team to any major threat. Naruto grinned. Konoha had become vibrant again with the loss of crime, and trade opened up better with other villages around Konoha. He remembers the look on the Hokage's face when he gave him a new tour of the base. Another flashback. Sarutobi looked on at awe at the small assorted concrete buildings, seeing a tower rise above the rest, overlooking a long concrete road. He saw assorted aircraft. He saw the same one he flew in before, but his gaze shifted to another one with 2 large blades and was bigger than the Blackhawk. He saw Naruto ride up in a metal vehicle that had the doors removed. He stepped out as the Humvee pulled to a stop. Laughing at the look on his face, he said, "Want a tour, Gigi?" All he got in response was a nod. Sitting back in his seat, he waited until the old man took a seat in the back before they took off towards the arrayed vehicles. Coming upon the helicopters, Naruto began, "As you already know, the Blackhawk, the other one is a Chinook. It can carry up to 30 troops, plus 4 crew." As they passed some aircraft that looked like birds, Naruto said, "Those are A-10 Warthogs. They can fly an average speed of 700 kp. They carry a different things but can drop napalm, cluster bombs, and rockets, along with a Gatling gun that fires a 300 RPS of 5 meters. Seeing the confused look on the Mon's face, he handed him a scroll. "There is detailed information, all these, and a better idea of how they work," he said, getting an understanding nod, as they passed 2 large aircraft that were easily 3 times the size of the Warthogs. "Those are AC-130, but we nicknamed her Kyubi." Hiruzen was shocked they would call it after a demon, but his answer came when Naruto said, "She could easily destroy any village." Naruto said seriously before pointing to the other one, "That one is AC-10 cargo plane, instead of the firepower of the AC-120. Its purpose is simple, that, cargo." They were starting to pass line of jeeps like this one. Naruto said, "What we're in is the Humvee. It was the one I told you before that could take a kunai barrage with only scratches. As you can see, 6 of them have .50 caliber issue machine guns, others are just plain messengers," pointing to a group of 4 large trucks that had a wider back. "Those are supply truck and troop carriers. They can fit at least 20 troops in the back." Then Sarutobi noticed from what he could tell were heavily armored vehicle. "Those 2 you see are Abrams. They are the ones that would leave a dent from a high-powered explosive tag. They fire a 120mm cannon that could destroy a small house in one shot." Hiruzen actually feared to see what these vehicles could do to a large army, but felt safe knowing these were going to be defending the country. He saw a smaller version of the Abram. Naruto saw where he was looking. That one is a Bradley APC. It fires a 30mm cannon and can carry 10 extra troops. That was the last of the vehicles. As they passed the tower, Naruto said, "That is the aircraft control tower," before pointing at a 3-story building. "That one there is the hospital. It's where the return seals will take the clones if they are injured and trigger the return seal. But it also returns them if they die," Naruto said solemnly, hoping it wouldn't come to that. Passing a group of small long buildings, Naruto said, "That is the barracks where the assorted groups sleep." As they passed a large 1-story building, Naruto continued, "That is the headquarters. All the clones have a radio in which they can be told orders from here." They stopped back at the gate. Naruto had the Hokage keyed into the seals before he had to return to his office. End flashback. That had been 5 days ago, and today was the day that the council had requested for a meeting with the Hokage to discuss the new forces. He remembered how the Hokage had stood firm when he told them he wouldn't be ready for a meeting for a month due to being swamped by paperwork, which was a lie, seeing as how Naruto had assigned a few clones to help be his aides, along with 2 personal bodyguards. It threw the Anbu guards for a loop when 2 people were already standing guard across the hallway from the Hokage's door. He told them they were added protection from Konoha's new allies. Sighing, he turned back to his squad. Now each filled into their roles perfectly. He had foreseen the different thought process, which kind of freaked him out in seeing how he could have turned out. Joker was the demolition expert, followed by Scar, joked because he was the one to stab himself in the leg, who took field medic training. Then came Juggernaut. He was the only one to keep wearing his mask, but he soon found heavier armor, which fit nicely with his M249 saw. "Alright guys, let's get this over with," Naruto said as he jumped off the monument, shortly followed by his squad. Catching their feet on the stone after a short fall, they took off running down the face of Sandaime. Reaching the ground, they slowed to a leisurely stroll, nodding to some passing MPs, who saluted upon seeing Naruto before returning to their patrol. Passing smiling citizens, they quickly reached the Hokage Tower. Walking past the receptionist, they nodded to the 2 guards who saluted outside the Hokage's door before they entered. Hiruzen looked up from some paper about a donation to the new allies, as they were calling the Rangers, to see Naruto standing there with his squad. "Ohio Gigi. You ready for this?" Naruto said cheerfully. Sarutobi had a sinking feeling that something Naruto planning was going to happen. He was way too cheerful. He asked carefully, "Naruto, what do you have planned?" Naruto opened a pouch on his vest, pulling out 3 scrolls. "Oh, I just got a present for Danzo," he stated casually. Hiruzen grinned, finally able to get back at his old rival. Sighing, he said, "Well, might as well not keep them waiting." He stood being flanked by Naruto and the squad. As they exited doors, they followed the old man to the council room. Upon entering, the once quiet chatter ended. Naruto's squad stood guard outside. Hiruzen walked to his top seat. As he took a seat, Naruto stood at attention not a few feet behind him. Sarutobi looked at the shinobi side consisting of the Kekkei Genkei clans, then to the civilian nobles. Speaking, he started, "Now why was this meeting called for?" Uchiha Makoto spoke up from her seat, "About the new military police whose stat they work for you." She was curious about the new guards who seemed to help out around the village for free, while still enforcing the laws. A few of them nodded at man. Higurashi said, "And who are our new allies exactly?" Sarutobi grinned as he decided to indulge the civilian first. "They call themselves Rangers, and right now there is a base on top of Hokage Monument holding 300 troops. Their technology far exceeds anything I have ever seen. They only trusted me, so we sign a contract, and here is the contract." As he pulled out a copy, passing it to the ninja side, watching as they read, their eyes widened at this. As it reached the elders, it passed from Makoto to Homura, whom read it before passing it to Danzo. Danzo read it, trying to calculate this new development. It may ruin his plans for Konoha, but as he started to pass it to Mitokado, 3 scrolls landed on the table from him. He looked down before looking from the direction to see the blonde looking at him. That also means any spies found will be dealt with accordingly, Naruto said seriously, watching Danzo grab the scrolls, scowling. But didn't saying a word, knowing he was caught. It passed the civilian's side before returning to the Hokage. Shikaku looked at Naruto, scanning him before saying, "How do you fit into all this, Naruto? Your name is on the contract. Also, was this by what you meant your path leads somewhere else?" Naruto nodded seriously. "Yes, Nara-sama, I plan on being the shield of Konoha." Glancing to Makoto, he said, "And you are looking better than when I last saw you, Uchiha-sama." Makoto looked confused, saying, "I don't believe we have met before, Naruto-san." Hiruzen gave a mild glare to Naruto before saying, "The one who finally saved your life has stepped forward." This caused a gasp throughout the room. Makoto looked shaken as she said, "Who? How?" Naruto walked towards the door before opening it slightly. Sticking his head out, he spoke quietly to Scar. Shutting the door, he started saying as he walking back to the table, "What is in this scroll saved your life that night. I was watching over Konoha 2 years after the Kyuubi incident, practicing when I noticed Itachi massacring his clan. He was moving too fast for a clean shot. But lucky enough he finally stopped. In your house, I barely had the shot." He unrolled the scroll, setting it on the table before channeling a contraption with wooden board and a rod attached it to. Naruto started by saying, "It can hit a target from a kilometer away. In the right conditions, from the estate to the monument was 700 meters. Sealing it back," he said. "Any other questions?" Receiving none, Naruto motioned for the Hokage to follow him. Stepping out the doors, they were greeted by a grim-looking squad. "What happened?" Naruto asked. "We just received word that Team 8 is in trouble. The small bandit problem turned out to be a larger one. They're injured and are requesting backup immediately," Joker said as he handed the scroll to the Hokage. Sarutobi read the message before turning to Naruto. "Since it came by bird, it may be too late. Get there as soon as you can." Naruto nodded but cursed inwardly. The choppers are still on a supply run to a village that was recently raided by bandits. "We can take some Humvees and be there in an hour." Receiving a nod, Naruto shushined to the base, quickly radioed ahead to launch the A-10s. When Naruto reached the Humvees, he threw a sealing scroll to Joker as he sealed a Humvee. Seeing they were done, they took off running, launching out of the base's gate before jumping off the monument, running down the side. As Naruto and Joker unsealed the Humvees, Naruto spoke into his radio, "Clear the main street, Humvees coming down for extraction." Getting a confirmation, they loaded into the vehicles. Naruto took the lead as Joker followed behind him with Juggernaut. As they drove down the street, picking up speed, civilian watch on in awe as the vehicles roared by. As they moved back into the street watching the Humvees, twin roars echoed above them as they watched two flying things take off in the same direction. Naruto was flooring it, hoping the bandits hadn't already launched an attack. He shifted gears, picking up more speed. Kurenai looked towards her injured students. The mission had gone to hell when they were injured fighting off a small bandit force 2 days ago while scouting a large bandit camp. Today they stood across an open field as the bandits across from them readying arrows. She tried telling her students to return to Konoha, but they agreed to stick together. She was touched, but even she knew that they wouldn't be able to survive this. She closed her eyes as they raised their bows. Pulling out 2 kunai followed by her students, they began to charge towards the group. Halfway there, though, her prayers were answered in the most unusual way. Metal contraptions roared over the hill before they started to fire upon the bandits. Her eyes widened as bandits were cut down. She watched as Hinata threw up, seeing one tore in half. Her ears rang mutely as she watched the carnage. Naruto parked in front of Team 8. Opening the door, he jumped out as the bandits started to charge, attempting to overrun the Humvees. Kurenai-san, we're the extraction team, enter the Humvee and my medic will take care of your wounds as we head back to Konoha, Naruto said as the guns continued to fire, not even fazed by the noise. All Kurenai could do was nod as she ushered her genins into the metal carriage. Just as Naruto got in, they heard a roar start to build before they looked out the opposite side of the jeep. Eyes widened as they heard a virsh sound as the bandits began to be torn apart as the ground ripped up below them. Two warthogs flew past, making the eyes widen of the display. When they were done, barely a few bandits survived. The ones that did retreated, still getting cut down by the .50 cals. Naruto pulled away from the carnage as the guns on top stopped firing. She turned to the teen that was shaking his hand in front of her face. Kurenai, is it alright if my medic takes a look at your team? Kurenai was shaking, but managed to get out, sure, but what the hell was that? She almost shouted hysterically. Naruto nodded to the other teen that started to tend to teammate wounds. Turning back to Kurenai said, those were Konoha's new air power. I'm Naruto and the man behind you is Scar. Kurenai turned back around to see the man using a medical jutsu to heal the cuts and scraps on the team. Turning to Naruto, she whispered a soft, thank you. Naruto looked sideways at her saying, you're lucky we were able to arrive in time, Naruto said seriously. He however heard someone gasp. Turning he saw Kiba pointing at him, you're one of our new allies. How? You were in the academy a month ago. Naruto sighed as he saw Kurenai turn a questioning gaze to him. I'm actually the commander of the Rangers. Kiba stared speechless before sitting back, thinking he need to tell his mom when he got home, thankful to be able to. Naruto clicked his radio informing them they had Team 8. Kurenai was surprised at the use of long-range radios, theirs could barely go past 75 meters. As they were pulling towards the gate, Naruto turned to Kurenai, do you think your team should be able to walk? She turned to her students, seeing them nod. She said, yes, we can make it. Scar crouched down from the gunner seat saying, and after you give your report, get to the hospital to get a check over, just in case. They pulled up to the gates as Naruto parked. Stepping out, he waited for Team 8 to get out, and once they did, he sealed the Humvee. Naruto tossed the scroll to Joker. Get those back to the base. Joker nodded as he took off in a jog back to the base. Naruto started walking back to the Hokage Tower, followed by Team 8 with Naruto's squad flanking them. Halfway to the tower, Kurenai sent her students to the hospital to get checked out. Naruto led Kurenai to the Hokage's office. They entered the room to see Hiruzen sigh in relief as Naruto said, mission successful, a cleanup team is already on way to the site to get rid of the bodies. Hiruzen flinched at that but looked towards Kurenai saying in a serious tone, report, what happened? Kurenai shuffled her feet nervously before saying, it was a routine eliminate some bandits, but instead of the said amount, it was larger. We were injured while watching the camp. After that incident I sent word to Konoha requesting reinforcements. Here she nodded at Naruto. Sarutobi sighed as he rubbed his temples. You're dismissed, Kurenai. You and your team has a week off to recuperate. Kurenai nodded before smiling at Naruto as she left. Naruto turned back to Sarutobi, seeing him looking at him. What's wrong, Gigi? Sarutobi pulled out a scroll saying, a recent request for a mission has me worried. The man is obviously not being truthful, but what do you know of Wave's situation right now? Naruto thought for a second before saying, from the reports sent in by Wolf Team, their economy has been on the decline. Apparently the money mogul Gato has taken over the shipping ports. He has started to hire mercenaries. Also, he is the primary suspect in the assassination of the Wave's daimyo. Last report said they started work on a bridge recently. Why? Sarutobi's face grew grim. An old man who calls himself Tazuna requested a C-rank escort mission, and he listed that the only dangers should be bandits. Naruto thought. He knew that the man had to be desperate to lie to the Hokage. Turning, he started to pace. Hiruzen watched him slightly amused as Naruto whispered softly to himself before stopping and turning towards him. I can send a squad for protection. They can slip in with Tazuna. Where's a large force to liberate the island would scare off Gato. We can assassinate him when the opportunity presents itself. Sarutobi frowned at that thought process, but saving the country from oppression would open more contracts and support. Sighing, he steepled his fingers, saying, "Then you have this mission. I will have Tazuna brought here so we can tell him of the arrangements and to let him know we know of the situation." Naruto grinned, moving to the couch on the side he sat as he notified the team of another mission and to grab a Humvee. Sarutobi asked the receptionist to grab Tazuna. After he finished that, a small commotion started to get louder as it neared the door. It sounded like two women arguing. The door opened as the arguing stopped. Sarutobi flinched at who walked in with her team, looking discreetly to see Naruto's reaction. Naruto saw the woman walk through. While it wasn't the first time he met her lately, they rarely spoke, closing his eyes thanking Kami they hadn't noticed him. Kushina was slightly irritated listening to two of her students argue about some man they met a couple weeks ago. Thankfully they stopped when they entered the office. She saw Sarutobi looking at her seriously. Shit, she thought she must have interrupted something. Team 2 here to report about a successful B rank, she said nervously, seeing the Hokage's eyes soften with recognition. Sarutobi let out a breath he was holding. Lighting his pipe, he said, "Ah, good to hear that, Junin Uzumaki. You have 5 days off before being returned to active duty." Taking the folders, Kushina turned to see two of her students pointing at a teen sitting on the couch accusingly. The teen was making SSSHH gestures before seeing her looking at him, smiled sheepishly. "Naruto-kun. Naruto-san," rang out. Kushina turned back to both her students with an indelicate eyebrow raised when she saw both of them giving each other a death glare. Putting two and two together, she turned an accusing finger at the blonde, saying, "You're the one these two have been fighting about." Naruto was perplexed, looking at everyone in the room as he saw the two female teens blush deeply as they heard that. Scratching the back of his neck, he smiled sheepishly. "I didn't know I was in an argument, sorry, Kushina." Kushina was about to retort when the door opened again, letting an old man with a round belly to stagger through the door. Everyone turned to the new addition that looked at Kushina, then to her team, saying, "These are the brats I'm getting. They barely look like they see." He was interrupted as Naruto covered his mouth, whispering quickly in the mont's ear. "Shush. Don't want to get them started. I'm your protection, so I would prefer to guard an alive contract instead of a dead one," Naruto said seriously as he patted the man on the shoulder as he saw the murderous grazes of the 4 women present. Sarutobi coughed into his hand, getting the attention of Team 2. "Thank you for your reports, but we have a mission to discuss," he said, clearly dismissing Team 2. The 3 teens left while 2 waved dreamily at Naruto, who waved back awkwardly as Kushina glared at him. When the door shut, he turned to Sarutobi, who said, "Tazuna, we know about the situation on Wave." The man started spluttering, attempting to make an excuse. Sarutobi stopped him cold with a small release of ki. "While you shouldn't have lied, we understand your situation. Naruto here has agreed to accompany you back to Wave, and stay and protect you as you complete your bridge. He will have secondary objectives, but him and his team shall be enough to adequately protect you. Any questions?" Tazuna felt relieved when he heard this teen would take the mission. Letting a small tear fall before he wiped it away, he said, "You don't know how thankful I am. The only question I have is, when do we leave?" Naruto grinned as he nodded to Sarutobi, saying, "Now, sooner we get there, the quicker the bridge gets done." Naruto turned, being followed slowly by Tazuna. As they exited the building, Naruto waited for Tazuna to get adjusted to the light before moving on. There was a mutual silence until it was broken by Tazuna. "So who are you?" Naruto grinned sideways at the old man. "I'm Naruto, commander of the Konoha Rangers." Tazuna looked confused before he saw two MPs walk by. Looking at them, seeing the same uniform Naruto was wearing, he said, "So you're the leader of these guys patrolling the city? Are you ninjas?" Naruto laughed at that. He stopped as he turned to Tazuna. "No, we're rangers, we're the shield of Konoha, and our leader is Hiruzen Sarutobi," he said as they continued walking. "We are the village's new police force along with defense. If things go well in Wave, we may see about negotiating about putting a base on Wave." Tazuna looked like Christmas had come early, but before he could reply they arrived at the gates where three other teens were waiting. Naruto motioned at his team saying, "The one in all the armor is Juggernaut, the one with the shit-eating grin is Joker, and the last one is our medic Scar." Tazuna waved meekly at the three as they in turn nodded their heads. The one called Scar threw a scroll in the middle of the road as a Humvee appeared before them. Tazuna looked odd at the metal behemoth before him. Naruto saw the drop jaw and said, "You're getting ready to ride in style, Tazuna." Holding the door open, Naruto helped Tazuna sit down before taking the seat opposite of him. Joker hopped in the driver's seat as Scar got into the front passenger seat. Tazuna heard a thump on the roof as a pair of padded legs slid through the hole in the roof. Naruto waved his hand in front of Tazuna, getting his attention before thumping the side of the door. "This thing is armored with 4 inches of solid steel. The only thing getting though here is a chakra-enforced kunai." Naruto sat back to catch a few winks before they reached the sea. The last thing he heard was Tazuna's gulp as he took a swig of sake. However, it just felt like he closed his eyes. When he was violently shook awake, he slammed his arm against Tazuna while he pulled his pistol. He heard Joker curse. Looking at him, he said, "What happened?" Joker placed the vehicle in park. Cursing, he turned to Naruto. "Felt like something dropped. Hope it isn't that muffler again." Naruto rolled his eyes as he said, "You would pick the only Humvee that needs repaired." Joker opened his mouth to retort but was interrupted by a banging on the roof. "Hey boss, it wasn't the muffler. We got 2 bodies back here," Juggernaut said, keeping his .50 call trained on the prone bodies. Naruto grabbed his M4 saying, "Joker watches Tazuna. Tazuna, stay in your seat. Scar with me." "Are you sure this will hold all of us?" Tazuna asked skeptically as he sat down in the rubber boat that a second ago was just a rubber package. Naruto saw Scar pinch the bridge of his nose as he answered again, "Yes, it could carry 8 people and not sink. This is easier than waiting for your contact." Tazuna grumbled but otherwise kept quiet. Naruto shook his head as he pushed the raft off the shore before he jumped in. Joker and Scar started to paddle softly towards the direction of the island. 10 minutes had passed before the uncompleted bridge started to appear through the fog. Tazuna was waiting for the gasps of awe and waited to see his protectors ask questions. He was however let down as he saw the scanning eyes of the 4. Once they reached the shore, they hopped out quickly, sealing the boat again before unsealing the Humvee. Naruto took the driver as they all piled into the Humvee. It was a little cramped in the back seat with Juggernaut and Joker sitting on either side of Tazuna. Naruto started to drive slowly down the road, keeping his eyes peeled. He looked out the side window, and was about to look back at the road when something caught his eye in the mirror. "Duck!" he yelled as he slammed down on the brakes, turned hard left on the wheel. Both Juggernaut and Joker covered Tazuna with their bodies as glass shattered and the sounds of metal on metal sounded. Naruto turned his head as he saw a gleaming blade not 3 inches from behind his head. Kicking open the slightly cut door, Naruto stepped out, followed by Scar. Scanning the trees, Naruto didn't see any movement when he felt a presence appeared next to him, exactly on top of the blade sticking out of the Humvee. "Now who would you be, kid?" a menacing voice asked. "You bear the Konoha emblem, but I can say I have never seen this thing or your face before." Naruto turned towards the voice, keeping his weapon trained on the man as he started to pull the blade out before reappearing a couple feet away with his sword resting on his shoulder. "Momochi Zabuza, Demon of the Bloody Mist, if you don't desist from completing your contract with Gato, we will use lethal force, Naruto stated seriously as Juggernaut and Joker both got out of the Humvee. Zabuza couldn't believe what he was hearing. This kid had the gall to tell him to back down. Swinging his blade, he started to run towards the blonde. However, his eyes widened when he saw the weird weapon the teen was holding have fire appear at the end. He was, however, not suspecting a piercing pain erupt in his leg as he stumbled a bit before disappearing into the mist that started to gather. You can't win, Momochi-san. If you turn yourself in, we will make sure you are cared for. If you don't see a qualified medic soon, you will die from blood loss, Naruto said as he and his clones got back to back surveying the mist as it got thicker. You can't, a demon, was whispered as Zabuza appeared in the middle of them. He brought his sword down towards Naruto. He was, however, surprised when the sound of metal against metal rang out. His eyes widened at the bent weapon Naruto used to block the sword. Naruto thanked whatever deity for letting that work, pushing the sword to the side to not lose his opportunity go to waste. He quickly pulled out his combat knife as he jammed it into Zabuza's sword wrist, before pulling it out, slamming it into the unwounded leg before tripping him. Zabuza felt the cuts as he started to fall backwards. He saw the blade following his head and knew he would die. He, however, was surprised as the blade dug into the ground next to his ear. He felt something slap onto his chest. Looking down, he saw it was a seal. Its purpose was found out a second later when he lost the feel of his chakra. You're lucky. I need to find Gato's headquarters, or you would be dead. Now get your sidekick out here or we put a bullet in her head. He saw the Mont's eyes widen in slight fear at that, but hardened knowing he was caught. Naruto sighed as he pulled his pistol, firing a shot. A yelp was heard as a body fell out of a tree nearby. Joker and Scar got to the body, which seemed to put up a fight but stopped when she realized that they had put a chakra suppressant seal on her. Naruto took off her mask. He was surprised to see the angry stare that was directed at him. Tying the mask to his belt, he turned to Scar. Heal them both, then make sure they're secured. We're going to take them back to Konoha after this mission. Haku was confused as the teen named Scar was healing Zabuza. Before healing her also, she never felt any pain like that before when she was hit, and she was surprised when just a little crushed metal piece was pulled out from her leg. Tazuna got out seeing they had caught the two missing nin. He said loudly as he walked up to Naruto, I thought you said it could reflect kunai all the way up to being chakra enforced. Naruto rubbed his ear before giving an annoyed look at the client saying, well, I didn't take a flying giant ing sword in account now, did I? He gave a withering glare at a slightly snickering Zabuza. Shut it, you. Now Tazuna, do you have a place to stay? Naruto asked as he looked at the 2-inch hole where the sword had been through the door. T.S. King. He turned to Tazuna. Yes, me and my daughter run a small inn not far from here. Why? Tazuna asked, perplexed. Cause we're going to need a place to set camp. If everything goes well tonight, Wave should be rid of Gato by tomorrow morning, Naruto said as he signaled for everyone to load up in the Humvee. Zabuza and Haku were both thrown in the back. Naruto had Tazuna's seat in the front passenger to keep him away from the prisoners. Naruto parked the truck in front of the nondescript 2-story building. A woman in her 30s was standing out front with what had to be her son. Looking at Tazuna for answers, he was giving one. The woman is my daughter Tsunami, the boy is my grandson Inari. Naruto stepped out to see the women straighten but relaxed upon seeing her father get out after Naruto. Tsunami was fearing who the people in the metal machine park out front of their house were. However, when she saw the Konoha emblem, she was slightly relieved, but the fear returned when she saw a teen dressed in a different kind of camouflage that she had ever seen step out with green body armor on. Her fears were unfounded when her father stepped out of the other side. Inari was afraid of the newcomers. He had never seen anything like this before, and he knew they were from Konoha, but he let out a whoop of joy at the sight of his grandfather before running to him, gripping him in a hug. Naruto smiled at the sight before he heard Tsunami start to talk. My name is Tsunami, thank you for making sure my father returned safely. Naruto nodded and grinned as he said, well, Lady Tsunami, is it alright if we stay at this inn while we finish up our mission here? Tsunami looked confused, but Tazuna beat her to answering, of course you can, Naruto. I mean, seeing as how you're going to get rid of Gato, Tazuna said as he lifted a wide-eyed Inari. Tsunami gasped as she looked back at Naruto, is this true, Naruto-san? Naruto nodded, just call me Naruto, but that is the plan. Also, we have two prisoners who will need separate rooms, he asked as he waved to the tied-up Zabuza and Haku who were being carried over the shoulders of Juggernaut. Tsunami looked at them wide-eyed. She said, we only have 3 extra rooms, I don't think we will have enough for you and your squad plus the prisoners. Naruto waved off her worries saying, that's okay, we're going to be doing guard duty so only one person will be sleeping every couple hours. She quickly ushered everyone into the house showing where Naruto could put the 2 prisoners, and also where his team could sleep. Naruto had Juggernaut take first watch. As he walked down the stairs to see Tsunami already started on making dinner, Inari and Tazuna was listening to Joker tell them about his gear and weapon. Turning back up the stairs, Naruto went to Zabuza's room. He slipped through the door seeing the man lying down on the bed. Naruto shut the door as Zabuza looked at him. Sitting in a chair, he asked, so are you going to tell me where Gato's headquarters is? Zabuza kept his eyes trained on Naruto before letting out a laugh, and why would I do that, brat? He is still my contractor. Naruto kept looking at him with a blank face but said, I would just torture you, but my ways of torture are pretty loud and I would hate to get blood stains on Tazuna's floor. Naruto stood to start pacing. He said, I know the truth about the incident in which you were marked as a missing nin. Zabuza gasped but ground out through clenched teeth, and what truth would that be? That you were freedom fighter, fighting for the liberation of the bloodlines in Water Country. After attempting a failed assassination on the Yondaime Mizukage, you ran with your young apprentice, Naruto said as he saw Zabuza's face grew blank. Naruto sighed knowing he wouldn't get the man to talk. He decided for a little ploy, fine, I guess I can go ask your female apprentice, at least I will be able to interrogate her while still being quiet. This got the effect as Zabuza attempted to launch himself at Naruto. Roaring with rage, Naruto just backhanded him with his pistol. He attempted to get up but felt the cool barrel press against his neck. Naruto said again, now tell me what I want to know before I realize you're just a waste of space. Zabuza ground his teeth before he said, he is on the Ing 4th island, damn it. I swear if you touch a hair on her head I'll rip your balls off before force-feeding them to you. Naruto picked up Zabuza before dropping him back on the bed. He said, now that wasn't so hard, now was it? All he got in reply a murderous gaze. Shrugging his shoulders he opened the door to leave but turned to Zabuza. Konoha Ranger Law 45, any ranger knowingly attempting to rape a female will be shot on sight. He closed the door to a blinking Zabuza before he heard aloud, you Ing brat. You tricked me. Naruto laughed as he walked towards the female prisoner's door. Opening it he saw the female teen looking out the window, who turned surprised but eyes turned to ice as she stood a few feet from him. Naruto sighed as he kept standing. He said, my name is Naruto, I am the commander of the Konoha Rangers, who might you be? Haku glared at her captor thinking she knew what he wanted. She said, my name is Haku, and no matter what you do to me I won't talk. She stated fiercely before dropping her robe. Naruto's eyes widened at this but kept the grin of his face as he tried to keep his eyes from wandering down her body. Shaking his head he backed up, please put your clothes on, I'm not here to do anything like that. Haku blushed scarlet as she picked up her robes before putting them back on. She huffed as she looked away from the boy who was quietly snickering at her. And what would you be here for? I'm a tool for Zabuza, so you won't get me to reveal anything. Naruto took a seat. He still couldn't believe that most kunoichi had to deal with this if they were captured. Sighing, he sat back saying, "You might want to stop with the tool bit. I get annoyed by those phrases, but Zabuza didn't seem like he thought of you as a tool a second ago." Haku looked at Naruto with a blush still on her face. She asked, "And why would he change his mind?" Naruto pulled out a book before tossing it to Haku, who caught it. Reading the title aloud, she asked, "Konoha Ranger Laws. What is this?" "That is the laws of my fellow rangers. Zabuza thought I was planning to rape you. He let slip about Gato's whereabouts, but he didn't know about Law 45. Naruto motioned for her to open the book. She did, finding the law he mentioned quickly enough, but it made her eyes widen in surprise. None of the great villages had that law. Naruto stood from his seat, stretching his back. He said, "Keep that. It'll give ya something to read while waiting for us to return to Konoha." Haku saw him halfway through the door before she stopped him. "Stop. What will happen to me and Zabuza-sama?" Naruto looked into her eyes, saying, "Once we return to Konoha, you and Zabuza will be held in our base's cells. Afterwards, Zabuza will more than likely be given to Kiri." Naruto shut the door as a soft sob followed him. He hated it, but it was how things worked. He just hoped the new Godime was sworn in recently. Walking down the stairs, he passed Juggernaut. He said, "Give them some rations. I'll have Scar come keep watch in an hour, okay?" Receiving a nod, he went down the stairs to see everyone sitting around the table eating. Taking a seat as all the eyes turned to him, he said, "Joker, me and you are going to go to the headquarters tonight. Should be able to get in quietly to plant some explosives along with a few other things." Seeing the meal turn somber, Naruto got a few bites before motioning for Joker to follow him. Stepping out the door, Naruto pulled something out of his pocket, followed by Joker. Equipping their silencers, Naruto nodded to Joker. They started to run off in the direction of the small island as his mic crackled to life. "Naruto, this is Wolf Team. We just arrived back in Wave. Where do you need us?" Naruto smiled at the reinforcements. He clicked his radio. "Just in time, guys. We're going to take out Gato's headquarters. Should need some support. After this, you will be taking up protection of Tazuna's family." The mic was quiet for a second. "Understood. Try to take him out tonight. He was planning something big tomorrow. We just passed a large camp of mercs." Naruto cursed but acknowledged the information, quickening his pace. Arriving at the fourth island, part of the chain that made up Wave Country, looking through the ACOG scope on his new M4, he saw guards patrolling the grounds of an expensive mansion. Moving ahead, he crept slowly through the trees. As they were 15 feet away from a pair of guards, he motioned Joker to the side of him, counting down with his fingers. 2 silent shots rang out. The 2 guards crumpled in a dead heap. Passing the bodies, they reached a side door. Looking at Joker, who was opposite of him, he started to count down to the opening of the door, but was surprised as the door swung open. However, the person never made it through alive, as half his head was taken off, courtesy of Wolf Team. Quickly move into the door, shooting the 2 samurai standing guard. Joker stepped through the door and let out a whistle at the first body. "Damn Wolf Team." Naruto nodded his head in agreement before saying, "You go plant the C4, I'll take care of getting the data." Joker nodded as he took off down a separate hallway. As Naruto took the stairs, he moved quietly through the halls. 3 guards rounded a corner in front of him, raising his gun. 3 soft puffs later, 3 dead guards laid on the floor. He was, however, caught by surprise as the door next to opened and guard rammed his sword through Naruto, pushing him all the way to the wall. Naruto yelled in pain but managed to stab his attacker in the neck with his combat knife. Pulling the sword hurt a hell of a lot more than going in. He was glad it didn't hit anything vital, but knew he needed to get it patched soon. He walked towards the main office, trailing blood from his stomach wound. Opening the door, there was no one in there. Cursing, he clicked his radio. "Joker, any sight of Gato?" There was silence for a minute before Joker's voice came across the radio. No, but I have the bombs planted. Gato isn't here. He must be at the camp. I'm going to finish taking the files, then meet me at the rally point, Naruto said as he clicked the radio off as he walked towards the desk before rummaging through the drawers. Naruto had grabbed the files on the slave ring Gato had going on. He was about to head to the safe to bust it open when a little slip of paper caught his eye. Opening it, his eyes widened before he let out a laugh, saying, "What a little retard." He left a note about his combination. Grinning, he went to the safe. Putting the sequence in, he clicked it open. Still, he couldn't believe his luck. He, however, was surprised to see what was in the safe. A couple of scrolls sat in there when he looked at them, though. Apparently, Gato thought keeping all his money in scrolls was easier than a bank. Shaking his head, he turned to the door. He saw 3 guards standing there. Hi, Naruto asked awkwardly, seeing his only escape through the window. He took off towards it as the guards drew their swords. He tossed a grenade behind him as he jumped through the window. Flipping, he landed on his feet, gasping in pain by his wound. He looked up to see the guards looking at him as he waved bye to them before the grenade detonated, launching them from room where their broken bodies landed on the ground around Naruto. Naruto took off in a slight jog towards Tazuna's house, followed by Wolf Team and Joker, as the mansion erupted into a giant fireball lighting up the dark sky. Tsunami sat at the kitchen table thinking of what would happen tomorrow. Either the teen would succeed or fail. She shivered at the thought of him failing but knew the boy would. Gato. She stood before moving to sit on the porch to await the teen's return. She was surprised, however, to see her father already outside looking at the stars. He turned towards her when she stepped through the door. "Why are you still up, father?" she asked, taking a seat next to the old man. Tazuna took a swig from his container, much to the annoyance of his daughter. He said, "Waiting for the brat to return. I hope he makes it back alive and with Gato's head." He saw his daughter nod in understanding. The door creaked open again to admit Scar to the group. He looked serious as he stood there waiting to speak. Tazuna stood as he said to Scar, "Have any news, Scar?" Scar was silent as he pointed in the direction of Gato's mansion. They both turned following the way he was pointing. They waited for several seconds before Tazuna started to get annoyed, seeing nothing. He was about to turn back to the teen when they saw a fireball erupt in the distance, easily clearing the trees and could probably be seen from the fire country. They heard Scar sigh, letting out a soft, "Joker must have used too much explosives." With a sigh, he turned to Tazuna and asked, "Is it alright if we commandeer your table for a while?" Tazuna could barely take his eyes off the sight of the fireball. It was a sign of change coming, he could tell. Turning to the medic, he asked, "Why do you need our table?" Scar took a seat, saying, "Someone was injured. The wound will need to be dealt with when he returns, but I need a flat surface where I can lay him down." He nodded to Tsunami. "I don't think she would like to try and get blood stains out of the sheets." Tsunami let out a gasp as she covered her mouth. She said weakly, "Yes, of course you can." "Who was injured?" Scar was about to answer when 3 people ran through the trees. 2 were helping the 4th walk towards them. When they entered the porch light, they gasped, seeing it was Naruto. They quickly opened the doors, letting Joker and another teen help Naruto through, being followed by another teen following them in. Naruto was already laying on the table with his armor and upper clothes taken off. Scar ran his glowing green palm over Naruto's wound. Shaking his head, he turned to Naruto. "You're lucky. The only damage is a severed large intestine. Shouldn't be too hard to fix, but might take it easy." Joker couldn't resist saying from where he was standing, "Good thing you took that shit before we left, boss." He, however, was whacked up the side of the head from one Tsunami. She turned back to Naruto as he grit his teeth in pain, feeling the wound start to stitch together thanks to Scar. "What happened?" Naruto looked down to see the fresh scar on the left side of his stomach. Gingerly sitting up, he said, "The mission went perfectly at first, but a guard who was just leaving the bathroom caught me unaware." He stood favoring his right side. He said, Gato wasn't in his mansion, however I managed to get files, going to have to go through it but should have something for you guys soon. He motioned towards the two new teens saying, this is Wolf Team, the one carrying the long rifle is Remus, the other is Romulus. The two new teens nodded in greeting as Naruto continued speaking, they will be guarding your family Tazuna while we're at the bridge tomorrow, any more questions? He knew they had tons but were obviously holding back due to how tired he looked. He nodded his head before sealing his blood-stained clothes. He headed for the stairs throwing a good night over his shoulder. He had asked for more reinforcements for tomorrow, knowing Gato was more than likely going to attack after he learned it was his mansion that went up in a ball of flames. Touching the new scar added to his small collection, his last thoughts as sleep took him was hoping everything turned out okay tomorrow. Naruto awoke early the next morning before Tazuna and his family. He made a big breakfast from some food he kept on his person in case of dire situations. After he was done, he sat down with his team and Wolf Team to discuss the plans for the day. Wolf Team would guard the family while Naruto's team would watch Tazuna at the bridge. The small family awoke to the smell of cooking. They stumbled down the stairs to a small feast. They looked confused as to where all the food came from but was answered by Naruto. It's from me, eat, we have a big day ahead of us. Naruto waited for them to finish sitting before grabbing 2 plates of food. He moved towards the stairs. He arrived the first door. Opening it, he entered to see Zabuza trying and failing at tearing the seal off of him. Naruto actually laughed seeing the demon of the mist attempting to bite his seal. Zabuza looked up seeing he was caught. He growled being seen in a weak position, but his nose caught the smell of recently cooked food. He saw Naruto carrying 2 plates. He sat one down on the table. He turned to Zabuza. I know the rations were that bad, but seriously, eating paper won't help the taste. Zabuza glared at Naruto saying, I'll make sure you pay if I ever escape, brat. He grumbled, still eyeing the food as if it was poisoned. Naruto sighed as he sat by the door. I bet you will, but I'm not here to make future plans but to ask if you wanted to get some sunshine. Zabuza stopped moving as he saw Naruto looking at him seriously. He said as he took a bite of food, and what is the catch, brat? Naruto stood from his seat. It's going to be a sunny day today after the mist clears. I figured you and your apprentice would like to come to the bridge with us, he said as he looked outside to the foggy morning. Zabuza looked at Naruto with a blank face before he grinned. You know Gato will probably attack today, seeing as how your little firework display more than likely pissed him off. Naruto nodded as he went to the door. He said over his shoulder, and the more reason to have you there. Naruto shut the door to a curious Zabuza. He nodded to Romulus as he opened the door to Haku's room. He was surprised to see her still in bed with a scarlet face. Raising an eyebrow, he laid the plate on the end table. He said, did I interrupt something? Haku shook her head furiously, not believing Naruto almost walking in on her, relieving some frustration. She had finished the book last night and ran out of things to amuse her. However, some real food was a welcoming change. She took the plate timidly as Naruto spoke. You and Zabuza will be going with us to the bridge today, so after you're finished eating, get ready for some traveling, okay? Naruto said as he took a seat near the bed. Haku nodded her head as she swallowed her food. She asked, I have a question, Naruto-san. Naruto waved his hand. Call me Naruto. Hate honorifics, but shoot, what's your question? Haku looked shyly at Naruto saying, are you recruiting people, Naruto? Naruto eyes widened at his. He looked at her seriously. And where did you get that idea, Haku-chan? Haku blushed at the suffix but said, I found the copy of the contract in the back of the book. It said you would recruit at your discretion. Naruto scratched the back of his head. He had forgotten he put that in there for the use of showing the contract if any incident came up. He sighed as he said, I'm sorry Haku-san, but I won't take people who have ninja status. Haku let her head fall in sadness, however when Naruto spoke again made her snap her head up, putting a creak in her neck. But seeing as how you were never officially a ninja, we can discuss it when we return to Konoha, okay? Haku couldn't believe what Naruto said. They would at least discuss it. She was about to thank him when she heard the door close shut as Naruto left. Naruto walked down the hall. As he passed Romulus he said, "Give them 15 minutes then have them outside, okay?" He received a nod as he headed down the stairs. Seeing the house empty he went outside to see his team waiting for him along with Tazuna. Tazuna turned to Naruto and asked, "So when are we leaving, Naruto?" Naruto put his hat on as he walked towards his team. "In 15 minutes, waiting for the prisoners to finish eating." Tazuna looked slightly frightened at the thought of bringing them and asked, "Why are we taking them?" Naruto stretched tenderly, touching his side. He said, "It's supposed to be nice today, so thought they would like some sunshine." Everyone's sweat dropped at the thought of Zabuza enjoying sunlight, but they were interrupted by the arrival of the pair being followed by Romulus. Naruto smiled at Haku, who smiled back. Zabuza looked suspiciously at Naruto at the exchange. Naruto turned to Romulus saying, "Okay Rom, I want you to stay in sight. Rem, you find a nice tree to post up in, okay? Should be back this afternoon." Receiving confirmation at his orders, Naruto led the group towards where the bridge was being built. Naruto noticed the fog was starting to let up, but not much. Arriving at the bridge, everything was quiet. Naruto pulled his weapon along with his team. Tazuna weren't the workers supposed to be already working? Tazuna looked around for a sign of his crew saying, "Yes, but I don't hear anything." Naruto motioned everyone forward saying, "Keep your eyes clear, we don't know what Gato has schemed." With that they moved forward onto the bridge. They traveled for a bit before bodies started to appear. Naruto bent down to feel for a pulse, finding none. He looked towards his squad, seeing them shake their heads also. Tazuna looked at the bodies going pale. He threw up on the side. Zabuza looked at the bodies with a blank face as Haku showed regret at the needless deaths. Naruto stood clicking his radio. He said, "What's the ETA on those reinforcements?" His radio crackled to life. 10 minutes, why? Naruto said as he heard a voice yelling, "Fire! I don't think we have 10 minutes. Naruto heard the twinges of bows being fired. He said loudly as he tackled Haku, "Take cover." Juggernaut covered Tazuna. As Joker tackled Zabuza, arrows fell through the fog on top of the group. Naruto cried out in pain as he felt 2 arrows go into his right arm and legs. As soon as it started, it stopped. Naruto rolled off of Haku, who looked wide-eyed at Naruto for protecting her. Naruto looked to see if his team was okay. Juggernaut stood up from a shocked Tazuna. The arrows seemed to have bounced off of him. Scar stood pulling an arrow from his arm before healing it. However, when Naruto looked at Joker, he was still laying on Zabuza. Zabuza rolled the teen off of him, feeling blood drip onto his body. He looked at the teen and saw an arrow sticking through the side of his neck. Naruto tried to stand but failed. He yelled at Scar, "Get Joker, he's hit." Scar cursed as he ran over to Joker. Breaking the end off of the arrow, he pulled it out. He quickly got to work healing the wound as Joker coughed up blood. The fog cleared to show 300 mercenaries with archers in the front. However, at the head of the assorted group was a small man. "Ah, so you're still alive, Guess that just means we can use you as examples." Naruto should have known it was going to be trap. Cursing, he clicked his radio quietly, asking the ETA of the extra troops. The answer didn't sit well him. "We're 5 minutes away from your location, sir." What? No response. PPHH, if this is Konoha's new power, then they must be desperate. Men, take care of them, but make sure their heads are still on their bodies so we can hang them as a warning, Gato said as he started to walk back into the group. "Gato!" A voice yelled out. The midget turned to see one of the teens pointing something at him. That was the last thing he remembered as a round entered his head before spraying bits of skull and brains out the back onto the nearest merc. Everyone stood shocked at what just happened. The mercenaries turned at the group. Pulling their weapons, someone yelled out, "You just did our paycheck." They started to charge at the group. Naruto was surprised that this was the way he died. However, he yelled out as he saw Juggernaut start to run towards the mercenaries with his saw firing non-stop. "Juggernaut, no!" It however fell on deaf ears as Juggernaut still ran. He emptied his entire 200-round clip. Naruto was attempting to cover him from his position, but his aim was off as his shooting arm was injured. Juggernaut managed to take out 75 mercs, but he ran head first into the charging mercs, swinging his gun as a club. Naruto was forced to start shooting the mercs who were trying to make it to his group. He however never lost sight of Juggernaut as he cracked open a merc's skull with the end of his gun. However, everything stopped as a sword pierced Juggernaut's back, going through his armor, exiting out his chest. Naruto could only watch in shock as more weapons pierced Juggernaut, forced himself to stand as Juggernaut slowly fell to the ground, blood pouring from his wounds. Before Naruto could take 2 steps, however, the sounds of chopping blades grew louder until a Blackhawk appeared on the right side of the bridge. N043 pulled back the firing hammer on the minigun. He saw all the mercenaries looking at the chopper with wide eyes, and he smiled grimly, knowing this was the last thing they were going to see. Verssshhh. Naruto's face was blank as he watched the thugs get mowed down as rounds ripped through their bodies. Scar managed to seal the wound on Joker. He knew that what Juggernaut did had saved them. He let a tear fall at the first fallen ranger. Zabuza watched the destruction of the small army in front of him. This was Konoha's new allies. He was actually afraid for his life for the first time in a long time. Haku was openly crying seeing all the death. It was pointless, all for a few bucks. She thought fiercely as she saw the emotionless face on Naruto. Tazuna hurled again, seeing the carnage. If this was the Rangers, he will wholeheartedly agree for them to put a base in their country. After the last thug was, Naruto started to limp towards where Juggernaut had fallen. He was halfway there before Scar started to run towards him. The Blackhawk started to circle as another one appeared also, as a Chinook hovered at the end of the bridge, allowing 15 clones to jump out, scanning the area of targets. Naruto finally reached the area where Juggernaut fell. He was surprised to see Juggernaut still lying there, and he quickly rushed to him, knowing he was still alive. He kneeled next to the bleeding form of Juggernaut. He turned to Scar, yelling, "He's still alive." Scar landed next to them and quickly got to work trying to heal the wounds. He was stopped, however, when a hand gripped his. He followed it to see Juggernaut was the one who stopped him. "Stop it, it's pointless." Naruto pulled down the mask, saying, "No, it's not. You can make it through this." Juggernaut coughed up some blood. "I already know I'm dying, boss. They messed me up pretty good." Naruto let a tear fall as he said, "Then why did you do it?" Juggernaut smiled. "I did it, so you guys would survive. Just promise me, boss, not to port me back. I want to fly home." Naruto gripped his hand. He saw the troops start to seal the bodies for later disposal. He said, "I promise." He took out a piece of paper before applying it to Juggernaut's chest. Juggernaut muttered a soft thank you as his grip softened before falling limply from Naruto's hand. Naruto wiped his bloody hand on his thigh as he stood. He walked back towards the group with Scar, who was attempting to try and get him to hold still so he could heal him. Naruto said as he reached Tazuna, "Scar, you can heal me on the way back. Now Tazuna, the mission is complete. Gato is dead. 15 troops will stay here until the bridge is complete." Naruto pulled out 2 scrolls, handing them to the shocked man. "That is Gato's money and the shipping deeds. I would stay longer, but I have to take the prisoners back to Konoha and prepare a funeral." Tazuna looked shakily at the scrolls. He said softly, "I can't thank you enough, Naruto. You have already done enough. I'll be sure to visit to pay my respects to Juggernaut-san. Naruto nodded as he clicked his radio. Bring that Chinook around, we got prisoners to transport in a body. He got the affirmative as the Chinook hovered off the side of the bridge, allowing it to open its hold to the group. Naruto helped Zabuza and Haku onto the chopper before turning to see Scar and the now awoken Joker carrying the body of Juggernaut. They softly laid him down before taking seats opposite of the prisoners. Naruto waved a goodbye to Tazuna as he hopped onto the chopper as it took off back to Konoha. He sat down, allowing Scar to finally start to treat his wounds. Zabuza's voice broke through the silence. Well, I guess you can add saving a country to your forte. Think I could ask you to help me with Mist? Naruto cracked open an eye and said, but at what cost? He looked down at the body covered by a sheet. Shaking his head, he said, and why would I? The civil war has ended and a new Mizukage has been sworn into office. Zabuza and Haku couldn't believe what they heard. Looking at each other, they grinned. Looking out the window, they watched the passing trees going silent again. Naruto sighed as he knew that he would be needing to inform Sarutobi upon returning. He shut his eyes to get a small nap. The last thing on his mind before sleep took him was Juggernaut's words. He felt a hand shake him awake. Opening his bloodshot eyes, he saw it was Scar. Time to get up, boss. Naruto rubbed his eyes as he sat forward. Haku and Zabuza were still sitting in the same position, except Haku had fallen asleep with her head resting on Zabuza. Looking out the window, he saw it was still trees under them, turning a questioning gaze to Scar, who said, 5 minutes out, thought you would like to be ready. Naruto stood stretching. He said, thanks, Scar. Once the chopper drops me off, I want you to get Zabuza and Haku into the new cells, have Juggernaut prepped for burial. He whispered the last part hoarsely. Understood, sir. And if it is any consolation, Juggernaut died a ranger's death, Scar said seriously as he turned back to Joker to let him know what to do. Hiruzen was sitting at his desk staring at a piece of paperwork, thinking. He was stupid for sending Naruto on a mission, but it was his own choice. Standing, he turned to his window, seeing the fast approaching Chinook. The last report he gotten from one of his new assistants was that Naruto requested additional troops last night. That was the last report that had the old Hokage fearing for Naruto's life. He looked down at the message he received from the daimyo. He had asked if Naruto would be able to deliver this year's Chunin's exams to the 5 great nations. This move was bold, more showing off than anything, but could have benefits. His answer really depended if Naruto returned at all, and if he would agree to it. He watched the Chinook fly over his building. He was surprised to hear it overhead before it started to fade again. Taking a seat, he waited for news on Naruto when the man on his mind entered through his door. However, it wasn't the greeting he was expecting. Naruto stood at attention in his dirty BDUs and armor. Sarutobi could see rips here and there, but drying blood blotted his legs and arm, while there was a massive blood stain around a hole in his armor. His hands still had blood on them, along with bloodshot eyes spoke of an experience that won't be forgotten. Mission accomplished. Gato is dead and the threat to Wave has ended, Naruto said hoarsely as he dropped the salute. Sarutobi was saddened but needed to know the details. What happened, Naruto? He asked softly as he stood from his desk. Naruto slacked his shoulders and started from the beginning. After leaving the village, we kept en route until we hit a bump in the road. Sarutobi stopped him there as he asked curiously, what bump? Naruto let out a laugh while shaking his head. He said, the demon brothers decided to lie in wait for Tazuna. They however didn't understand how much a Humvee weighs, so it was more of a large bump. Hiruzen shook his head and let out a small chuckle, waving for Naruto to continue. Afterwards we made it to the meeting place of Tazuna contact, but after waiting an hour we decided to cross by ourselves. When we crossed we continued as planned but ran into Momochi Zabuza and his apprentice Haku. Sarutobi froze as he heard that. Looking at Naruto, he looked at his wounds. Naruto saw where he was looking. He said, "These weren't caused by him. He underestimated us and was captured along with his apprentice. They are currently on their way to the base's cells until I can return Zabuza to Mist." Sarutobi couldn't believe what he just heard. He managed to not only survive a run-in with the demon of the mist but to capture him was a feat unto itself. "I'll send word to Mist to be awaiting a prisoner. It may tie to something we will discuss later." Naruto nodded at the answer as he continued. "Afterwards we reached Tazuna's house. We waited until night had fallen. Once it did, me and Joker infiltrated Gato's mansion to him, but he was apparently greeting the new soldiers so was away. But we managed to get documents on his illegal dealings along with his money. I kept a third for payment of AA class mission and some to put towards more supplies for the Rangers." He handed the Hokage a couple scrolls, that is the money, files, and the bodies of the brothers. Sarutobi placed them on the desk to read at a later time. He turned back to Naruto. He said, "Excellent work on that. I'll make sure everything is squared and the bounty paid to the Rangers." Naruto nodded, but his face grew blank, freaking Sarutobi out as he spoke. "The next morning Gato attacked the bridging the workers. We were lured into a trap, letting him flank us with archers. Me and my team, save for Juggernaut, suffered wounds. Gato finally made an appearance. I put a ing bullet between the little pig's head," Naruto said viciously. Hiruzen knew something was wrong. "Naruto. What happened to cause such an outburst?" Naruto let out a ragged breath. Reinforcements were still 5 minutes away. So Juggernaut sacrificed himself to try and save us sometime, and he succeeded." Naruto let a small tear fall as he stood rigid, as Sarutobi was looking out the window. Sarutobi sighed. He turned to Naruto. "What happened to the body?" Naruto looked confused for a second but understood the Hokage was wondering, seeing as how the Rangers were originally Kage Bushins. "It didn't disappear. I plan on burying him later today." Sarutobi nodded his head in understanding. "Take a week off also, but before I let you go the daimyo sent me a request.